before summer, actually, before school let out. But we just sort of never got to it in the series before school let out, and seemed kind of silly talking about fighting in school in the middle of summer.
Yeah.
So it was kind of out of context. So I wanted to wait until we were closer to school. So on this episode of Insights into Teens, we delve into the hidden layers of school violence. Beyond the shocking headlines lie the pervasive issues of bullying, insecurity, and Star Wars music in the background from our video game.
Yep.
We'll discuss the often overlooked factors that contribute to this critical problem. We'll explore its impact on students, teachers, and others. And we'll uncover strategies to effectively address and prevent school violence. But, as always, before we get to that, I wanted to once again invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens. You can find audio and video versions of all of the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're pretty much anywhere you get a podcast these days. Apple, Spotify, Google, not Stitcher because they're going away at the end of the month, which is tomorrow, I think. But anyway, you know where to get our podcast at this point. I would also invite you to write in and give us your feedback. I mean, we talked about some pretty hard-hitting, controversial, spirited topics over the last 9 episodes or so. I'd love to get people's feedback on them. And just let us know other stuff you'd like us to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can hit us up on Twitter or X or whatever Elon's calling it this week. We're at insights_things. Or you can get links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get started?
Yes.
Here we go. So what is school violence? So our initial research we took from verywellmind.com, a site we use quite frequently. They tell us that school violence isn't confined to the dramatic headlines. It's a pervasive issue that affects 246 million children annually. This problem isn't gender neutral either, as girls and gender non-conforming individuals bear a disproportionate brunt of it. Within the educational sphere, violence takes on various forms, with fellow students being the primary perpetrators. It spans verbal, sexual, and physical realms, sometimes involving weapons, but not exclusively. Acts that leave someone feeling threatened or harmed, regardless of the method, fall under this umbrella.
Defining school violence involves recognizing its occurrence in the school setting. It's not just a specific type of violence, but describes acts that disturb learning and harm students, schools, and the community at large. Examples of this encompass bullying, cyberbullying, fights, weapon use, gang-related incidents, and sexual violence. The locations where these events unfold include school property, the journey to and from school, during school-sponsored events, and even on the way to or from such events.
So, what really prompted this a few months back to talk about this topic was there were a number of fights that you were coming home and telling us about, none of which you were involved in, obviously.
Yeah.
But they were fights that had some kind of effect on you, whether it was delaying you getting to school or a fear for your own safety or whatnot. Have you noticed an increase in violence or fights in schools recently, or is it kind of been at the same level since you've been going to school?
Well, I definitely started to see an increase as, I got older, because, when it came to, elementary school, you never really saw, fist fights or, aggressive fights to where, teachers had to get involved. However, I technically heard about my first fight in 6th grade, and ever since then, fights tended to get more rampant. And some of the more quote-unquote memorable fights I've seen included those when I've been in high school.
Okay. Now, one of the things that they talk about here is there's a high percentage of incidents in which individuals involved in these fights, at least in the survey goes, have weapons involved. Have the fights that you've seen or heard about in school involved weapons, or have they just been fist fights to this point?
From what I've seen, they've been fist fights. I haven't really tried to get, too much knowledge, but for the most part, the kids, I guess, kind of just throw themselves at each other, hoping to knock the other down.
Sounds like sumo wrestling.
I mean, kind of. It kind of has been like that. I've never... there have been fights that, happened and I haven't seen, and I'm not sure if anything like that ever tried to involve a weapon. But from the fights that I've actually seen in person or have been around, they've never seemed to have weapons.
Okay. So how big is this problem? The scope of the problem of school violence becomes clear when we dive into the data. In 2019, the CDC conducted a nationwide youth risk behavior survey, engaging over 13,000 high school students from across the United States. What emerged from this survey were stark statistics that shed light on the prevalence and nature of school violence. The first takeaway that we get from this report was bullying. Approximately 1 in 5 high school students disclosed that they had been bullied on school property within the past year. The hallways and classrooms that should be safe havens for learning can sadly become arenas of hostility for a significant portion of our students. The next thing they took away from the study was physical confrontations. The survey revealed that 8% of high school students had been involved in physical fights on school property 1 or more times during the 12 months preceding the survey. This troubling statistic underscores the prevalence of confrontations that extend beyond words and escalate into physical altercations.
The study also recognized that of weapons and threats. More than 7% of high school students reported that they had been threatened or injured with a weapon while on school property within the 12 months leading up to the survey. The presence of weapons in educational environments and the alarming frequency of threats pose a significant risk to the safety and well-being of students. Finally, they also mentioned the fear and absence. The survey unearthed that almost 9% of high school students had missed at least one day of school within the preceding 30 days due to concerns about safety. This statistic paints a grim picture of students' apprehension with their desire for education overshadowed by fears of violence.
So, things obviously are very different now than when I was in school. But when I was in school, when you had two people fight, they fought, and usually the teachers would get in and break it up. And it didn't matter who started it. There was, even back then, there was a zero tolerance policy that whoever was involved in the fight wound up getting punished in some form. Do they still have that kind of zero tolerance policy, or is there, because I know there's a lot more anti-bullying in schools now. Is there consideration for the bullying aspect of it, or if someone hits you and you hit them back, are both of you getting detention or suspension for it?
From what I know, both people, if someone ends up hitting you and you hit them back, you are to also be blamed for the incident. Even if you were defending yourself against a bully, even if the bully hits you first, if you hit back, that means you're part of the fight, you're part of the problem, you're kind of written up as well. And that's kind of something I actually mentioned last week in the ways of just, I think that's a bit extreme, especially considering, if someone had been bullied before and had to constantly take it and then finally ended up deciding to fight back against all the abuse they were facing, yet they were going to receive the exact same punishment, which personally I don't qualify as being fair.
Well, and if you're the victim, no, it certainly isn't fair. But if you're a teacher who doesn't have evidence to show who started the fight, it's fair in that both people get punished for it.
I mean, I guess.
That's just, unfortunately, that's just the way society works. That doesn't mean that it's fair. It's just equal treatment, I guess we should say.
Yeah.
The question that I had about bullying, though, is I know they lean pretty heavy into bullying through grade school and a lot of the anti-bullying campaigns and stuff like that. Do they do anything with bullying in high school at this point in time, or have they kind of just backed off on that and let the kids, if you didn't learn not to bully, then they just leave you be? Or is there some type of enforcement of anti-bullying rules in high school?
Well, it's certainly not as aggressive as it was when I was younger. Like, we'd constantly have assemblies about anti-bullying. You consistently see the posters about bullying, and like everybody kind of preached the idea that everyone should be friends and whatnot, instead of, enemies or whatever. I think by the time we got to high school, it was either, the implication that like you should already know not to bully somebody, or like they'd mention a more serious instance of it rather than just like, the kind of little kid version of don't be mean to people. I guess it's also kind of in the line of that, like they know that there are just going to be sometimes you're not going to get along with people and you kind of just have to learn to tolerate each other. But like if you get to the point of fighting, then that's a problem.
So there's I wouldn't say there's more tolerance of it than in high school. There's just less policing of anti-bullying then, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'd say, although we have, actual police walking around the school in case.
Well, that's probably for other reasons, but we won't get into that in this podcast.
Yeah, so I would say that, like, they don't really tolerate it, but they also don't really say anything to, like, convince us to not do it outside of the zero tolerance policy.
So there's no more anti-bullying training that they're actively engaging in?
Not really. Even some of, like, the assemblies, like, I'd say like I said, they kind of more or less focus on other serious subjects, and they occasionally encompass the idea of bullying, but it's not like every assembly is specifically about anti-bullying anymore.
I gotcha. So what are some of the causes of school violence?
So the causes of school violence are intricate and multifaceted, often defying simple explanations. Understanding why an individual engages in such behavior requires a deeper exploration of their experiences and influences. Several factors contribute to this complex issue, highlighting the diverse landscape that can lead to acts of violence within educational settings. The first thing they mention is diverse motivations. School violence may stem from a variety of sources. An individual could have endured bullying or social rejection, driving them to lash out. Academic pressure, while a norm in educational environments, can escalate to a point where it becomes a trigger for aggressive behavior. Moreover, exposure to violence at home, in the neighborhood, on screens, or in games can influence a person's actions.
They also talk about media influence. While connections between media consumption and violent behavior lack definitive proof, exposure to violence in various forms can potentially impact an individual's perception of acceptable behavior. The debate over the influence of media like television, video games, and movies on violent tendencies remains open, serving as a point of contention in understanding the roots of school violence. Complex risk factors are also involved. Certain factors increase the likelihood of a child engaging in school violence. Poor academic performance, a history of prior violent behavior, an impulsive personality, and mental health conditions can collectively contribute. Additionally, being a witness to or victim of violence, substance use, or a dysfunctional family environment, such as domestic violence, or access to weapons all play important roles in shaping a child's potential for violent actions. And finally, they talk about the environmental context. The community context also plays a crucial role. Surroundings marked by poverty, high crime rates, or the influence of delinquent peers can contribute to the development of violent tendencies. A child's exposure to a dysfunctional environment outside the school walls can intertwine with their behavior within them. So what do you think of these various races? Do you I see when they put media influence up here, and the first thing that I think is, well, that's a cop-out. We've had violent films and violent video games and violent television for 60 years now. And, I was always exposed to that sort of thing, and it never made me violent. None of those sources ever made me violent. And I'm one person. I get that. It's entirely possible that it may have a different influence on other people, but there's a certain segment of the population that wants to lump everybody into this whole, the media is evil, it makes everything violent. And I find a difficult time believing that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you for the most part. I definitely don't think that, technology is evil or video games tend to cause violence or, anything that, people try to say to make you think that video games are the problem. Because I personally don't, because there's been plenty of evidence at this point now to point away from the idea that shooting games cause teens to want to engage in violent activities. Although I can understand their argument in one specific instance, and that's in social media when they're exposed to just general people that are kind of just bad for them or exude a bad influence, like just screaming for no reason, ranting about literally everything, or just trying to get into an online argument over literally anything. I can understand that can cause a certain amount of rage in certain people, and I could see that leading to potential violence. But I'd say saying the media as a whole just promotes violence in general is an untrue fact and an untrue statement.
Well, and I think that's true. I mean, my point of view, I think social media is the most antisocial piece of technology out there. It literally brings out the worst in human beings for the most part. But, that worst isn't just violence, it's anger, it's bigotry, it's hatred, it's everything that it brings out in people. So I can't say that that's the sole source, because there are a lot of perfectly functional people who work on social media. There are people whose entire lives and livelihood are on social media. I think it really comes down to situational. They talk about the fact that there's diverse motivations, which is absolutely correct. You have risk factors such as your childhood upbringing. I can give you a half dozen examples of kids who grew up in violent households who never turned out to be violent. And I can give you just as many examples of kids who grew up in, the atypical nuclear family, 2.5 kids and a white picket fence. And the kid turned out to be extremely violent and disturbed and all kinds of problems.
Yeah, that's the one thing when it comes to this sort of thing and what people kind of assume goes into violence is that, while outside factors could certainly, have an effect, it's not guaranteed. Because, even if you had one of the worst upbringings or one of the best upbringings, it doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily reflect that kind of stuff. Specifically when it comes to you grew up in a household where your father was kind of a terrible person. He was terrible to pretty much anybody that wasn't him. He was terrible to you, he was terrible to your mom, he was terrible to your siblings. Yet, you're an amazing father. You're nothing like how you describe him, and you're pretty much the exact opposite of what he was. You're pretty much the perfect example of growing up with some bad situations, but not turning into a bad person as a result.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'll give you your $20 after the show.
You didn't bribe me.
But I think in my example specifically, my dad proved to be a good, bad example. I didn't want to be what he was. I didn't want to treat people the way he treated people. Maybe if my dad was more like my mom, maybe I would have turned out completely different. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the impact of school violence. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. Today we're talking about fighting in school, and now we're going to talk about the impact of school violence. The repercussions of school violence extend far beyond the immediate incident, affecting both the victims and the perpetrators. Understanding how violence leaves its mark is vital in comprehending the urgency of addressing this pressing issue. For children who have either been victims of violence or have witnessed it, violence can seem like a twisted avenue to attain safety. This skewed perception stems from the belief that strength and security can only be achieved through violent means. When they resort to violence, there's often an initial sense of relief, as it momentarily fulfills their emotional need for strength and safety.
However, this sense of self-satisfaction is transient, overshadowed by the looming fear of consequences. The fear of punishment or retaliation triggers anger, which in turn can lead to a cycle of escalating violence. These children often find themselves trapped in a paradox. They believe they must protect themselves through violence, yet this very violence triggers further emotional turmoil and potential retaliation. Breaking the cycle is crucial. Children need guidance to realize that while violence might provide fleeting relief, it inevitably spirals into more profound problems. They must comprehend that violence not only fails to address their underlying needs, but also exacerbates their predicament. Interventions and support mechanisms are vital in assisting these children to replace their skewed perceptions with healthier coping strategies. Now, it's worthwhile to pause a moment there and kind of talk about how violence and bullying was handled when I was your age. The prevailing thought was, well, if you're a bully and somebody hits you, you just hit them back because bullies are going to back down. And while there was a chance that that would happen, inevitably, every time that did happen, it always led to more violence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've heard the biblical admonition of an eye for an eye. Well, if everyone abided by that, we'd all be blind.
Yep.
You know, that's really the gist of that. So the idea that you fight back has complications to it that aren't problem solving. They're just problem evolving, I think.
Yep.
What did they teach you? Like in these various assemblies that you had when you were being picked on, what technique did they give you to use to try to solve the problem or mitigate the problem?
Well, they never really mentioned the idea about fighting back. It was more or less just telling a trusted adult so that they could handle it instead of you handling it. They never really offered suggestions for if somebody actually hit you, other than just going and telling an adult. So basically the idea was just like you needed to get a trusted adult to make sure that they would handle the situation instead of you, so you didn't get into any trouble or anything.
Well, and that kind of makes sense because I think today's society is much more litigious than it was when I was a kid. So there's always this looming threat of legal action. When I was a kid, if somebody hit you and you hit them back, you would just meet after school, you'd fight it out, and you'd get it over and done with. Nowadays, if you hit somebody, they go home with a black eye or a bloody nose, and the first thing their parents do is, instead of calling my parents to figure out what's going on and to solve the problem, they call their lawyer. And they're going to sue you at that point in time. So the schools, I think there's a large portion of that deflection in the schools because the schools don't want to have to go through the legal complications too. And nobody wins. There's no win-win scenario here where once the violence starts, everybody's going to wind up losing. It's just trying to stem the bleeding, so to speak, before it gets too bad.
Yeah.
So what's the impact on victims in this case?
So school violence leaves profound and lasting effects on its victims, both physically and emotionally. These consequences ripple through various aspects of a child's life, painting a bleak picture of the toll it takes on their well-being. Physically, victims of school violence can endure a range of injuries, from minor cuts and bruises to broken bones, concussions, and even fatal outcomes. Emotionally, the aftermath includes a spectrum of psychological distress, encompassing depression, anxiety, and rage. The weight of these emotions can disrupt their mental equilibrium, casting a shadow over their day-to-day lives.
Victims' academic performance often suffers as their focus wavers. The lingering fear of reoccurrence can make concentrating in school a Herculean task, leading to compromised learning experiences. School, intended as a haven for education, becomes a place for unease. Trauma from school violence is not confined to the immediate aftermath. Its psychological ramifications can be considerable, especially when experienced over an extended period. In the case of young minds whose brains are still developing, trauma can trigger survival mode, adversely affecting attention, concentration, emotional regulation, and the long-term health. The same 2019 survey underscores the potential long-term consequences of school violence. Victims are at risk of grappling with mental and physical conditions that span attachment disorders, substance abuse, obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and respiratory issues. The extent of adversity experienced in childhood correlates to the degree of risk to physical and mental well-being in adulthood. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They don't realize when you have these traumatic experiences, you hear about soldiers who are in a combat environment and come home and they have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Those same type of conditions are being recreated, albeit in a smaller, hopefully less lethal form in high school. But you're still having those traumas where you have kids years later when they're adults who run into someone who maybe bullied them when they were a kid, and they still have the same fear and terror and apprehension when they see them. And that's a scar that you take for life. That's not something kids should have to deal with. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd pretty much agree with you 100%. I don't think that's really something that people should be experiencing. Yeah, sure, some people might say that trauma is a good learning experience or whatever, but to have that as a kid, I don't really think is a good thing. Or to have it paralyze you in fear the moment you either think about it or see someone related to an incident where you were traumatized. That's not okay. Sure, it's good to kind of have a life experience when you're younger so that you internalize it more as an adult. But in terms of school violence, that trauma isn't good trauma. Like, it just makes you more anxious, it causes you even more distress, and it can lead to genuinely harming consequences when you actually become an adult.
Yeah, and we're talking specifically about victims of violence, but you've never been a victim of school violence, thankfully, at this point in time. But you've been a witness to it on numerous occasions. But even the victims don't get away scot-free. What are some of the things that impact victims in this case?
So the impact of school violence isn't confined to its immediate victims. Those who bear witness to such incidents also suffer profound emotional repercussions. The toll on these young witnesses is often hidden, yet its effects can be just as enduring and far-reaching. Children who witness school violence may grapple with complex emotions. They might feel a sense of guilt for not intervening or stopping the violence, even though fear could have paralyzed them from taking action. The weight of these conflicting emotions can create a heavy burden on their young minds. Remarkably, the brains of witnesses to violence can react similarly to those of the victim. The primal fight-or-flight response can trigger, flooding their minds with stress hormones and shaping their perception of danger. This psychological response can have lasting impacts on their emotional and psychological well-being.
The aftermath of witnessing violence can shatter a child's fundamental beliefs about the world. The illusion of safety that once enveloped the reality is disrupted, leaving them with a sense of vulnerability. This new lens through which they view the world can significantly damage their mental health, fostering anxiety, distrust, and even depression. For children to grow into emotionally resilient individuals, they need to first experience a foundation of safety and care. The ability to cope with threats and challenges stems from feeling secure and self-assured. Witnessing violence without reassurance of safety can hinder a child's ability to navigate the complexities of life. Having borne witness to this in the past a few times, do you feel that you've experienced any of these sensations or any of these negative repercussions as a result?
I mean, yeah, that's certainly something I could say. 'Cause, the illusion of safety, seeing at the school, that can fade a lot, and, it's gotten to the point where when somebody has a fight, I almost kind of expect it at this point, considering how much I've witnessed it. But even when I was younger and, I was just learning that violence happened in schools, I was traumatized. There was this one specific incident I distinctly remember. We had been doing a lockdown drill, in school when we were in 5th grade, and I was about 10 at the time. And my one teacher was very serious about it. He literally had a bat to make sure that if it was actually real and somebody would come through the door, he had a weapon on hand so that he could actually, make sure no one was going to harm us. He also actually did a test where he had all of us hide underneath the one table in the corner, and he would look through the window, and he would basically see where his sight of line ends so that somebody would place a piece of tape there so we all knew to hide on the right side of the tape to make sure that we weren't going to be seen. And one specific instance I remember was when we were doing a lockdown drill, and I ended up being one of the last ones there, and I was right on top of the tape. And the entire time I am freaking out. I know it's technically not real, but I was terrified that somebody would see me if it was actually real. And my teacher actually took notice of it, of my look, and after it was all done and over, he came up to me and told me that I was going to be fine.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It has that kind of profound effect on you, especially when you're at that young developmental age. But I don't have any good answers for that.
Yeah, and when it came to the actual school fights between students, while a lot of it kind of just came to annoyance to me eventually, one instance was where there was a fight during my lunch period. And at one point, they got pretty close to me and my friend's table to the point where I was scared that we'd actually get involved in it. So that was also kind of an instance where I'm probably never going to be forgetting about that, even if I was kind of shrugging it off afterwards, because it's yeah, we're at that age, there's been enough fights to begin with. Even despite the fact that I kind of shrug it off at points, I still genuinely fear about the safety my safety when I actually go to school.
It's also worth noting, we live in a upper middle income area where we're at, where you go to school. So the level of violence that you're exposed to as compared to a lower income, inner city or something like that is significantly less. And this is stuff that's traumatizing you. For the individuals that live in, areas where you have a gang presence or areas where you have shootouts. I mean, we watch the news and every day there's a different couple of shootouts over in Philadelphia. Like, that's real violence. That's what really scares me. I don't even feel comfortable driving through the city at this point in time to get anywhere. So where we're at, we're pretty safe. We're pretty well insulated from stuff like that. So I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for individuals who live in these more violent prone areas that have to deal with daily violence. Just you listen to the news, you've got kids that are being shot walking to and from school. Like, that is it's just not acceptable in society at this point in time. And the fact that it's happening on a regular basis is not good. People are getting shot over shoes or there was an insult or a radio station or something somebody got shot over they were talking about on the news just this week.
Or Hot Pockets, because I've heard that. Or
Hot Pockets. Like, there's so many different reasons that people are getting hurt. And it's not just being shot. You've got physical violence, you've got fist fights that are happening all the time. I mean, you're learning to drive now. We talk about road rage. Don't honk your horn at that guy because he might, do something crazy. Society is at a very scary point right now where there's very little appreciation for human life and human safety at this point in time. And it shouldn't be affecting school. We should be reinforcing these things in school, the respect, cooperation. These are the principles that we should be reinforcing in schools right now so that they can carry through into adulthood in the real world.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that my, kind of numbness to how many fights we have in school is kind of a bad thing. The thing that inspired the topic was the fact that for some reason there were 2 or 3 fights every week for at the end of school. And despite the fact that that seems kind of crazy, I was kind of numb to it because it's that kind of just happens here. I don't think I should be that numb to it because it shouldn't be, fighting in school should not be normal.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think violence in general in society here is happening so frequently that we're just resetting our expectations and it's becoming an acceptable norm.
Yeah, the bar is just getting lower and lower every single time something happens.
And unfortunately, it's the type of thing that starts at the top. You have political leaders in this country who advocate violence. And as long as that's happening and they're getting away with it, then it's okay for the rest of society to be violent. And it seems like that's the angle that we're going at. We're going to take our second break and then come back. And I want to talk briefly about the impact that school violence has on parents before we sum up with some ideas for preventing school violence. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. We are talking about fighting in school. So we've talked about the impact on victims. We've talked about the impact on witnesses. What's the impact on parents? The aftermath of school violence triggers a spectrum of reactions among parents, revealing the intricate emotional landscape they navigate as they grapple with the safety and well-being of their children. The reactions of parents to school violence are as diverse as the individuals themselves. This diversity stems from their personal beliefs, past experiences, and cultural values. These reactions provide a glimpse into the complex emotions parents experience when faced with the unsettling reality of school violence. In some instances, parents may inadvertently contribute to the cycle of violence. Misinterpreting aggression as strength, they might encourage their children to respond to bullying with similar behavior like we talked about earlier. This misconception perpetuates a harmful cycle and fails to address the root causes of the violence.
Other parents, in an effort to protect their children, might attempt to teach them behaviors that they believe will prevent them from becoming targets of bullying or violence. However, this approach often proves futile and counterproductive. The child may internalize the idea that they are responsible for the violence they experience, leading to self-blame and emotional distress. In contrast, some parents adopt a proactive stance. They work closely with the school, collaborate with teachers and administrators, and challenge the system if necessary, all to create a safe environment for their children. These parents strive to empower their children by ensuring they can learn without fear.
So what can we do to help prevent school violence? Every student deserves the fundamental right to learn in an environment that is safe, secure, and conducive to their growth. The encouraging news is that school violence is not an inevitable reality. It can be prevented through concerted efforts and strategic measures. The origins of school violence are complex and multifaceted, rooted in a multitude of factors, as we already discussed. Preventing its occurrence requires a comprehensive approach that addresses both risk factors that contribute to violence and protective factors that shield individuals from it. By understanding these dynamics, we can tailor interventions to effectively curtail the prevalence of violence. Preventing school violence demands the engagement of a diverse range of stakeholders. Teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and even students themselves all have a role in creating a safer school environment. Collaborative efforts leverage the strengths of each group and create a united front against violence.
Encouraging students to report any signs of violent behavior is essential. Many schools offer anonymous tip lines, providing a safe space for students to share their concerns without fear of retaliation. Children who witness or experience violence should be encouraged to speak up. The importance of open communication with trusted adults, such as parents, teachers, and counselors, cannot be overstated. Consistent reporting ensures that concerns are addressed promptly and effectively. Recognizing and reaching out to students who display signs of distress or aggression is crucial. By offering support and understanding, we can help them navigate their emotions and provide alternatives to violent behavior. Being vigilant about potential warning signs of violence is pivotal. These signs might include fascination with weapons, harming animals, bullying, threatening others, or displaying aggression. Recognizing and reporting these signals to parents, teachers, or school authorities enables early intervention, potentially diverting a child away from a violent path and towards a path of help and healing.
So I guess really the most important question that I can ask at this point is, do you feel that you have some course to remedy or some call to action in school that if you see violence or you are the victim of violence, that you can go to someone, report it somewhere, and have some level of confidence that someone's going to do something about it to help to make the environment safer?
I mean, for the most part, yeah. I'd say the school, does its best to counter the violence and such. They always try to make sure that there's teachers involved, or if they need to have any of the police around the school to also get involved to stop the violence. So if I was involved with it, or if I saw something happening, I do feel like I could go to certain teachers and know that they could, have my back.
Now, you're getting ready to go back to school next week. I think you start on Thursday. You've got 2 shortened days. Do you have any concerns for your own personal safety going back now, or do you think you're fairly safe going back at this point in time?
I mean, the concern's always there at this point. I kind of have that concern really going anywhere outside my own home, even if I'm not completely safe in my own home as well. But, it's just kind of going to be something I'll have to deal with. For the most part, my school's been all right with handling that. I've never personally had to experience too much violence. And while I don't have complete and utter guaranteed safety, for the most part, I'm not completely worried about that facet just yet.
I think that's, I don't want to say it's a healthy attitude, but I think it's a realistic attitude, given everything that happens these days, to kind of understand and appreciate the fact that nothing is 100% safe. So if nothing else, you don't let that generate anxiety, you let it generate awareness. So you're aware that things could potentially happen, and then you know what to do, how to act, where to go, where your safe spaces are. So as long as you have that understanding that things are not 100% safe, and I think it's a bad idea to try to portray that to students or anybody, really. Everyone should be aware that, there's potentially violence that happens everywhere, and you just need to know how to handle it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because, if we pretend that everything is safe or that everything is fine, we're not going to be prepared when something dangerous actually shows up. We're not going to, have any sort of preparations for it.
Right.
We're going to be freaking out a lot more at that point, and I wouldn't, let it completely generate anxiety to where, kids would refuse to even try going anywhere. I'd say make them aware of it, but also assure them that they have it under control. There's ways to prevent it. There's ways on how to deal with it if anything ever does come up, so that you don't have them to be completely ignorant or completely fearful.
Right, I agree. We're going to take a quick break, come back, get your closing thoughts, and finish up with the business of the podcast. We'll be right back.
Alrighty. Alright, so to everybody out there, I hope that this podcast kind of brought awareness to the real issues behind school violence, so that we can at least get rid of the stereotypes that it's only certain factors that play a part in it, and that it's more or less a one-sided issue. It's really not. It's a much more complex issue that, needs to be better understood. I feel, much like most topics when it comes to teenagers, there's plenty of misconceptions about it, and I feel if more people are able to be knowledgeable about it, we can help to fix it and hopefully prevent it in the future, much like giving better knowledge about how to handle school violence and not just saying everything's going to be fine or causing kids to panic.
All right. Wise words as always.
Thanks.
Before we go, once again, I want to subscribe to the podcast. For the record, I already do subscribe to the podcast, all of them. So everyone else should as well. You can get audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens. You can get audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, etc., etc. I'd also invite you to connect to us on social media. We stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcasts, or you can find all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. And you.
And don't forget to check out our other two podcasts, Insights and Entertainment, hosted by you and Mommy, and Insights into Tomorrow, hosted by you and my brother Sam.
That's it. Another one in the book.
Bye, everyone.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Your hosts are Joseph and Madison Whalen, a father and daughter team making their way through the challenges of the teenage years.
Welcome to Insights into Teens. This is episode 178, Sexting. I am your host, Joseph Whalen, and my intelligent and responsible co-host, Madison Whalen.
Hey, everybody.
How you doing today, Maddie?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm doing all right as well. I think we're going to forego some of the normal jovial banter that we go through on these shows. We have kind of a serious topic to talk about today.
Yep.
We're going to skip the plugs and all that stuff too, and I think we're just going to get right into it.
All right.
So the main theme of this podcast over the past 170 plus episodes has been to educate, entertain, and help teens deal with the trials and tribulations of growing up during some of their most significant formative years. Today's episode's a bit different. This topic was prompted by a recent event that cost the life of a teen through suicide. The story moved me to the point that I wanted to try to ensure the same thing didn't happen to anyone else. We're discussing a very sensitive topic, not to glorify it or to endorse it, nor are we here to pass judgment over anyone who engages in it. Instead, our purpose today is to acknowledge that it happens, discuss the dangers inherently involved in it, and try to help teens understand how to cope with the consequences of it should they engage in it. All in the hopes that the fate of that befell the young man in the article we're going to discuss does not happen to anyone else. Now, it's important to note this episode does discuss suicide. If you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide, please contact the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or 1-800-273-8255. So what is sexting? Sexting is sending and receiving sexual messages through technology such as a smartphone, an app, email, or webcam. For some people, sexting is a way to explore sexuality, trust, boundaries, and intimacy. However, in some cases, sexting is used to bully, blackmail, and exploit. Sexting can involve words, photos, or videos, such as a message or a post written with sexual language, nude or semi-nude photos or videos of sexual acts, live chats with someone on webcam involving sexual acts, or screen captured videos or photos recorded from webcam. Not all teens sext, but those who do, their experiences are very different. Even when there is consent, trust, and respect between people who decide to sext, it's hard to be completely sure of a sexual message will be private. For those who do decide to engage in sexting, it's important to know the facts on consent and the law. The decision to sext is a personal one. Not everyone feels the same way about it. Most teens decide not to sext. Older teens are more likely than younger teens to send and receive sex.
According to a recent survey of young people who've sent sex in the past, 49% of them sent them to their girlfriend or boyfriend. 43% of them sent them to someone they liked and were hoping to be in a relationship with. 31% sent them to someone they only knew online, and 20% sent them to someone they didn't know. Some of the reasons people may choose to sext are to explore sexuality with someone they care about, to connect with someone they like, or because they were pressured to do so by others. According to the same survey, the top reasons young people gave for why they sexted included, I do it for fun, I was pressured, to get a boyfriend or girlfriend, I was curious, and as a joke between friends. The survey found that 28% of young people who had sent sexual messages felt pressured to do it. Most of the time, this pressure was coming from someone who wanted a sext sent to them. For some people, being sexual through a phone, app, or webcam can feel easier than doing something sexual in person.
So now we know we have a frame of reference of what we're talking about here. I'll ask the obvious question that's hanging out there. Have you ever sexted with someone?
No, I've never gotten really close to anybody to really want that sort of thing. I never really felt the need to explore that part of myself, and I've never really had an opportunity where I actually wanted to engage in something like that.
Has anyone ever solicited something like that from you?
No, no one's that I know has ever really asked, probably because I either just keep in contact with friends and don't engage in social media, or just that I don't present myself as somebody that really wants anything to do with that.
Okay. Now, do you know if any of your friends have engaged in this sort of activity?
Not really. I haven't asked them personally, and I don't really know what goes on outside of that. I know that some of them are in relationships, but I don't know if there's anything that's sent between them at all. And I kind of, like they mentioned, this kind of thing is more or less personal, so I don't really ask too much about it.
What are your thoughts on it? Do you think that there's a viable or a legitimate use case for this type of activity?
I mean, I could kind of see the purpose in it. Like, the idea of exploring your sexuality is an important thing that, some teenagers tend to go through, and this is a way for them to work on that. And I think doing it in a somewhat more in a kind of privatized manner is probably all right. I wouldn't say this is the best option for exploring it, but it's certainly out there. It can have its benefits. And I guess I won't have too much of a problem if somebody's doing it as long as they're not harming themselves or others through it.
Okay, that's fair. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting when I was doing the research for this were the numbers. We talked about the statistics here, and almost half of the respondents to the survey had sent a sext message to somebody else. Do you think those numbers are correct? Do you think it's alarming? Do you think they're really higher than that, and the sample size may not have really shown the true numbers? Or do you think that those numbers are spot on?
I guess I don't really have too much of a way to judge it myself. Since I haven't experienced it myself, I can't really say for certain how common it is. I don't really tend to focus too much on this sort of thing, so it's kind of hard for me to have my own idea of what I think the numbers would be. I was surprised by some of the numbers and the ways of how, like, some people were more or less pressured into doing it than they were doing it willingly. But now, kind of thinking about it, I guess that also kind of makes sense because peer pressure exists in abundance when it comes to teenagers, and I could see people being pressured into sexting just like they would be pressured into doing anything else.
The one thing that they don't talk about is what the medium is for some of these sexting events in the article. Obviously, sexting is a phone-to-phone using SMS text is one thing, but I could see people using it. They talk about social media in here as well. Facebook comes to mind, Twitter, I guess, or X or whatever it is now. Are you involved? Do you use any of these social media? I know you do. You watch YouTube videos. Obviously, I wouldn't consider that social media. But are there any social media platforms that you use now that would engage in something like this?
Not really. I have, like, social media apps that were downloaded, but I've never actually used them or created my own account, mainly because I just don't feel like currently having anything to do with social media, and I get enough of... And despite the fact that YouTube technically isn't social media, I kind of have an awareness of what happens on social media through YouTube. So I feel like I don't really need to get any of the other apps since I have one app that technically kind of mentions almost anything. And obviously I don't think too many people are using YouTube to sext because that's a little strange. But
it's also, I think, against the platform's rules and regulations too. They would shut something like that down pretty quickly.
Yeah, but when it comes to other social media apps, I can certainly see it since, like, you can technically friend people on certain social media apps, or, like, you can, like, make a group with certain people, or you can just, like, engage with someone, like, directly with it. And the only real method I have for that is just the regular messaging app, which you can't really do that with just complete strangers. You have to kind of know the person's number.
Okay. Well, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the dangers of sexting. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. Today we're talking about sexting. And now we're going to talk about the dangers of sexting. Sexting can negatively affect your mental health, relationships, and future. It can even have legal consequences. Before sending an explicit photo, remember that once an image is out there, you can't take it back. What if you and the other person break up? What if they share your message or photo with their friends or social media networks? What if your parents or teachers found out? In some cases, the image could even end up in the hands of a sexual predator. If your sext includes a photo or video, it's important to remember once it's created, it's impossible to control where it ends up. Even photos and videos shared through an app promising they'll disappear aren't completely private. Some could still save a copy. or someone could still save a copy. Choosing whether or not to sext is a decision only you can make. Feeling uncomfortable or pressured to sext is never okay.
If you're considering sexting, here are some questions to ask yourself. First, why do I want to send a sext? It's important that you feel in control of whether you send a sext and that you send it because you want to. If you're feeling uncomfortable or pressured, it's always okay to say no. How well do I know the person I'm sexting? Sexting with someone you met online or someone who's much older than you has different legal concerns than sexting with someone your own age. If I send a sext with a photo or video, will I have control of where it ends up? It's impossible to have control of a photo or video once it's sent. What's my gut telling me? Trust your instincts. Only take part in things you feel comfortable with. And finally, will the police get involved? It's very possible the police will get involved, especially if any of the following factors are in play. If you were threatened or blackmailed to send the content in question. If abuse or assault is depicted in the content. If you were under the age of 18 and sent it to someone older than yourself, or if it failed to stay private between you and the person you sent it to. You should talk to a lawyer if you have questions about sexting and the law.
Sexting can have potential emotional consequences, like regret, objectification or victimization, bullying, depression, sadness, social isolation, loss of friendships, loss of respect for yourself, or ultimately, thinking about or actually hurting yourself or others. Sexting can also negatively affect your future, such as your employment, college admission, military admission, your spot on a sports team, scholarships, future relationships, or even your mental health if you have to relive the consequences of your decision. Employers and colleges often look at candidates' social media profiles and online presence. Having nude images or photos of alcohol or drug use could hinder your ability to get a job or into college one day.
So what are the legal consequences of sexting? Now, obviously we're not lawyers. We can only kind of scratch the surface on here, but it's one of the things that need to be considered. So if a person involved in sexting is under the age of 18, it's considered child pornography. The legal consequences can vary depending on the state where you live. Some states consider it a felony to both send and receive the photo, even if you didn't ask the person to send the photo. If the person in the image is under 18, you may face legal consequences if you're the photo taker, a person seen in the picture, the sender, the receiver, or just in possession of the photo. Sexting can also put you at risk for placement on the sex offender registry and possible jail time. Usually the consequences are harshest for those who request or share the photo. Even if you're not breaking the law, your school can punish you and others involved, even if you're legal adults.
So how do you avoid serious consequences from sexting? First, never take photos of yourself you wouldn't want everyone to see, including your family, classmates, and teachers. Never forward someone else's sex-related photos or messages. You could get in serious trouble, especially if the person involved is under the age of 18. What do you do if someone pressures you to sext? If someone asks you to send a nude photo or explicit message, you may be afraid to turn them down because you don't want them to stop liking you. But if someone truly cares about you, they won't ask you to do something that puts your mental health and future at risk. If someone sends you an unwanted message or pressures you to sext, tell a trusted adult. That's sexual harassment, and that's not okay.
So a couple of interesting things for us to probably break down here.
All right.
The first is the technology behind it. So depending on the medium that you send it through, once you create that file on today's modern cell phones, most of them are cloud connected. So if I take a picture on my phone, there's a very good chance that a copy of that's going up to the cloud already, whether it's Android, Google Cloud or Apple or whatever. So there's a copy already right there that's off your phone immediately without you even realizing after just taking a picture.
Mm-hmm.
Those services then do backups themselves. For Apple, for instance, you have 2 or 3 different backups of your photos. And they do that as a convenience for you so that you don't lose your photos.
Yeah.
But if you forget to go and delete one of those photos somewhere, it's always going to be there. And that's before you even send it to someone. Once you send it to someone, depending on how you send it, like for instance, let's take an SMS message or an iMessage. So you have a photo on your phone, couple of photos in the cloud for Apple. Now you're sending a photo to someone. Now, usually, depending on what kind of phone they have, if they have an Android phone and you're sending a movie or a large folder, what Apple will do is it will store it in a temporary location on the web and then send a link. Well, that link goes to the person, they click on it, and they're pulling it down right there, so they have a copy of it. They could send that link to someone else. So now you've got at least 2 more copies floating around out there of whatever it is. Possibly more if they send it to someone else. So let's say you send it to someone through Facebook. Well, Facebook gives you the ability to delete your stuff. But Facebook's deletion of your stuff isn't actually deletion of your stuff. One, because you're using a browser. So when you upload it through a web browser, you've got a local cache, and that local cache then uploads it. So there's a copy in your cache.
Mm-hmm.
You send it to your friend looks at it, it goes into their cache. So even if they delete the file after downloading it, it still sits in their cache there, so someone can get to it.
Yep.
Plus it sits on Facebook servers, and Facebook is infamous for allowing you to delete, and I do that in air quotes, delete your content, but they never really delete it. They simply hide it from you so that you can't access it anymore, but they never delete it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know what these service providers out there are going to do. It's a lot different than, if you took a Polaroid of yourself. For those of you out there that don't know what a Polaroid is, it was a camera that you pushed a button and the picture came out and developed itself. It was a very unique idea, well before digital cameras. But that was the only copy that you had. There were no negatives. Normally in a traditional camera, you take pictures on a roll of film, which generates negatives. You take those negatives and get them developed.
Mm-hmm.
But you always have the negatives. So with a Polaroid, you never had negatives. But the point is that picture you snapped is the only copy of that ever existed. The notion of that doesn't exist anymore.
Yep.
As soon as you push that shutter button on your phone, there's probably 5 to 15 copies of that somewhere within the next 2 minutes. So you have to keep that in mind. The technology right now is geared towards distribution and backups. So there's no such thing as privacy when it comes to that.
Yep.
So that's very important to keep in mind. And the other thing they talk about, it's a very simple rule. Don't take pictures of anything that you wouldn't want your parents or friends or teachers or anyone else to see. Even if you do it for yourself, it's probably not a good idea with the technology that you have today.
Yeah.
Because it's so persistent. We're kind of a victim of our own success when it comes to technology today. Because we're so geared towards back up everything. Everything needs to be backed up 12 times. I'm just as bad the way I back up our data. We've got 5 local copies of it here just because I'm paranoid about losing family photos.
Yep.
What do you think? Do you think that the technology today makes sexting too easy and too dangerous?
Yeah, definitely. Because it certainly makes it a lot more dangerous because, well, there's millions of copies. There's going to be tons of copies of an image you sent, and it could go to literally anybody, including predators. And the idea that you also have the ability of that technology and just easily message somebody that also, it makes it too easy and it's just too dangerous in general with the technology and the ways of how of fast communication and consistent backup.
What are your thoughts on the legal consequences? Because you're under 18. If you engaged in this act with somebody and sent someone else an inappropriate picture of yourself, you'd be legally liable for that. That would technically be child pornography, even though you're the one who technically would be victimized there. Does that, I mean, it terrifies me, but does it scare you at all to think that something like that could happen to you?
Yeah, it kind of follows the same rule I remember my school having, which I always kind of thought wasn't all that fair, was the idea of how, like, if a person is fighting you, if you fight back, you're just as guilty as the other person, which I wouldn't say is the most fair thing to say. Like, if you just got bullied consistently for, like, years and never actually fought back, and then fought back one time and then you were entirely punished, like, I'd say that that's a bit extreme to, like, give the same punishment to the person that got beat up as the person that beat them up.
Right.
And, I never liked the idea of victim blaming. And, like, sure, if they actively engaged in it, even if they were considered to be the minor, it's like, okay, I guess, but, like, even just receiving it when it was completely unwanted and still being liable to a crime for it, it's just, that seems messed up.
Yeah, it's a little extreme, but I think they kind of do that almost as a scared straight type thing to kind of really hammer home the significance of it to kids. I don't know. I don't know what the motivation is behind it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for, like, actually having legal accountability for this sort of thing, especially if, minors are involved with it. It's just, I don't know, it seems to kind of push the extremes on occasion.
It does, but I think the motivation is understandable. The law enforcement does not, and the authorities and parents and everyone else doesn't want kids getting involved in stuff like this because of how dangerous it is. So they just may be pushing the boundaries too far to punish the kids who do get involved in it, when really the kids are the ones that are being victimized. And what you need to do is you need to punish the people, and they do. They punish the people that are pressuring the kids into doing these types of things. But sometimes they're other kids. And it's, it's a very difficult situation. Once you go down that path, it's a very difficult situation to navigate. So we're going to take our second break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk a lot about the consequences, the actual real-life consequences that can come from sexting. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
In this segment, we're going to discuss a news article that involved the suicide of a young man. If you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide, again, we ask you to please contact the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 or at 1-800-273-8255. Jordan DeMay was a 17-year-old high school student and football player whom his father, John DeMay, described as, quote, smart. He was a good student, and he was a great athlete.
The teenager began chatting with someone he thought was a woman on Instagram. The account was real, but had been hacked and sold to a 22-year-old Nigerian man named Samuel Agashi, who posed as a woman. He used the profile to coerce young men into sending explicit photos of themselves. He allegedly used the photos as leverage for money, according to the FBI. Jordan fell victim to this version of extortion, which is termed sextortion. The 17-year-old football player's tragic fate is not uncommon in America and across the world. Teens across the U.S. are falling victim to sextortion on social media.
Jordan's father described the attack as, quote, "Someone came into his bedroom at 3 a.m. and murdered him through Instagram when we were all sleeping at night, and we had zero chance to stop it." John DeMay is sounding the alarm about sextortion after his 17-year-old son, Jordan, died by suicide last year. The suspect in Jordan's death is one of 3 suspects from Lagos arrested recently for allegedly hacking Instagram accounts and sexually extorting or sextorting more than 100 men online.
The FBI defines sextortion as a serious crime, in which the perpetrators threaten to expose a victim's sensitive or private information in exchange for sexually explicit material or money.
Agashi threatened to distribute the explicit pictures the 17-year-old sent to the compromised account of Jordan if Jordan didn't pay him a ransom. The attacker demanded $1,000. Jordan sent $300, and the attacker threatened to expose the victim to his family and friends if he didn't send more. Distraught and not sure what to do, Jordan messaged Agashi, telling him he was going to kill himself. "Good," Agashi responded. "Do that fast or I'll make you do it." Jordan DeMay did do it.
A 2018 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA, Pediatrics, found that nearly 15% of U.S. youth were sending sext or sexual texts, while 27% of youth were receiving them. The perpetrators pose as real people, often as attractive women or men online, and target young and vulnerable victims. They will reach out directly to victims and strike up an online conversation, gain the victim's trust one way or another, and convince them to send nude photos. Once the photos are exchanged, the perpetrators threaten to share them or make them public if the victims do not send money, other personal information, or more explicit images. The scheme pushes some teens beyond their breaking point.
Jordan's father said he encourages parents and teenagers to learn about the risks of sextortion and have a plan in place if it happens to them or someone they know. Specifically, he advises victims to turn off their phones and contact law enforcement or the FBI immediately. He also said he would tell Jordan every single day, if he had a chance, that threats from the sextortionists were not the end of his life. He goes on to say the kids have to just understand that this isn't the end of whatever they think is their life, because it's not, DeMay explained.
The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's Cyber Pipeline received about 32 million reports of suspected child exploitation in 2022. The online incitement category of the cyber pipeline saw an 82% increase in complaints between 2021 and 2022.
The FBI encourages anyone who believes they are victims of sextortion or knows someone who may be to contact their local FBI office or toll free at 1-800-CALL-FBI. So this obviously is an extreme case of consequences as a result of sexting. We talked about some of the other potential downfalls of sexting. But when I read this article itself, being a parent and being a parent of a child who's of this age range, it kind of struck a nerve with me. And it's looking at these statistics about the 82% increase in complaints in just over a year. It's a real problem. There's I mean, it's going to sound cliche, but there's bad people out there. There's bad people on the internet, and they're going to do things, nefarious things, to try to get money from you, to sometimes to just do things maliciously. People they're just evil, and they'll do things to harm you or to get you to harm yourself, not necessarily for any financial motive at all. And I thought if there's anything that we do on this podcast, we try to be positive. We try to be upbeat. We try to teach kids and parents how to get through some of these difficult things. And I read the quotes about Jordan's father here, and I could almost echo those thoughts myself. And I thought maybe we might have a chance to maybe reach out and help educate other people about this and to try to prevent something like this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, honestly, I believe the same thing. Like, obviously, we always try to make sure that we keep everything lighthearted, because we've talked about darker topics in the past, and we've always tried to at least bring some lightheartedness to the situations while still not downplaying the severity of all of them. And I do think that bringing more awareness to this is the best way that we can stop it. It's how we can stop anything pretty much bad from happening, is try to bring more awareness to it, because if more people know about it, there's going to be more people willing to stop it, or at least be aware of it, so that it doesn't happen as often.
I would agree with you 110%. I think mission accomplished today. I don't want to drag this out too far. I know it's kind of a dark topic. We usually are not quite this low key, but I wanted to make sure we treated this subject with the respect that it deserved. I think we're going to forego the closing remarks. I think what you just told us there, I think, very easily summed up the overall sentiment we have here. Before we do go, though, I did want to throw some quick plugs out there, just to remind folks to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens, and you can find audio and visual of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things, and we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast. I would also invite you to write in, give us your feedback, give us your thoughts on the subject. I'd be very interested to hear what our listeners have to say about today's talk. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or X, whatever it's called now. You can also find us streaming 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings, where you can find links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. And you.
And don't forget to check out our other two podcasts, Insights into Entertainment, hosted by you and Mommy, and Intentional Tomorrow, hosted by you and my brother Sam.
That's it. Another one in the books.
Bye, everyone.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Your hosts are Joseph and Madison Whalen, a father and daughter team making their way through the challenges of the teenage years.
Welcome to Insights into Teens. This is episode 177, Unconscious Bias. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my objective and open-minded co-host, Madison Whalen.
Hi, everyone.
How you doing today, Maddie?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm doing quite all right. Anything exciting going on with you before we get into the topic of the day?
Well, Mommy's been off all week, so we've been doing some stuff together.
That's nice. What'd you guys do today?
We went to the shore.
Nice. Did you get to see any of the planes from the air show? I know they're doing the AC air show today.
No, but we saw plenty of advertisements.
Oh, well, that's good.
Didn't get ad blocker on the beach. I think that's like a separate subscription or something. So.
Right. Nice. So today we're going to talk about unconscious bias and the impact it has on all of us. You'll be introduced to some common types of biases that have a large impact in our lives. We'll also talk about how to notice the effects of bias in your schools and in your communities. This awareness is what is needed to begin to make the necessary changes in our behavior, which we'll address in our last segment. But before we do that, I would like to encourage all of our viewing and listening audience to continue to subscribe to the podcast. As we announced last week, we recently surpassed the 50,000 downloads mark of the Insights into Teens podcast. That doesn't include the individual podcasts, which are audio only. So thanks to our loyal listeners for that. We'd love to get your feedback on how we're doing, what topics you'd like us to discuss, or your opinions on the things we talk about on the show. And we'd love to share your feedback with the audience. So you can contact us at comments@insightsintothings.com via email. You can hit us on Twitter at insights_things. Or you can check us out on the web at www.insightsintothings.com for all of our social media links. Are we ready?
I think we are.
Here we go. So what is unconscious bias? Unconscious bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our views, our actions, and our decision-making ability. Scientific research in this area demonstrates how unconscious bias is automatically activated and affects how we think day to day. It also impacts hiring and evaluation processes and contributes to the lack of workforce diversity, and even how we treat others on a personal level. The unconscious part of the concept indicates we're not actively aware of the root of those decisions are impacted by the stories, beliefs, or perceptions we may have of others. Bias implies that we are skewed in some way in our decision-making. But unconscious biases are, in fact, not a judgment. Everyone is biased. Each of us holds a set of perspectives that help us navigate a complex world efficiently. Our goal is to bring awareness to the subject that is misunderstood and, in some cases, unnecessarily overcomplicated. We're going to attempt to simplify unconscious bias today. And our hope is that you'll have a better understanding of the concept and some tools for how to think and behave differently.
So what's the impact of bias? Is a small amount of bias really going to dramatically affect your life? The short answer is yes, and the long answer is still yes. Researchers created a computer simulation that showed a 1% bias in favor of promoting men in the workplace. You might think that beginning with the same number of men and women in entry-level positions and applying a 1% bias in promotion wouldn't change the expected 50-50 outcome. In fact, applying a 1% bias in favor of men at every 6-month review for 10 years led to 65% of the most senior positions in the company being held by men. Every decision made about a person, from the time you meet them to when we're hired to the time we're promoted, passed over, get fired or quit, each decision costs us, and wrong decisions send us running to the nearest online employer, rating board, or college message board to post a negative review, and failure to attend to unconscious bias can even impede positive organizational change and organizational resilience.
The study dealt with bias in the workplace, obviously, and while the initial research simulation was only run at 1%, when you add additional factors to the equation, things get worse. By adding in the bias that occurs when the job description is written, recruiting begins, interviews take place, hiring decisions are made, and then promotions are considered, you can see how the situation compounds. A small amount of bias has a large impact on our lives. The effects are dramatic and exponential. And as we continue to shine a light on unconscious bias, we need to also keep in mind that people are increasingly making decisions about the schools they attend, professions they enter, and job offers based on the institution's reputation diversity issues. As candidates, we have choices. In order to remain competitive, colleges and businesses will need to address each aspect of the process from start to finish. So this kind of became more of an issue recently with a recent ruling from the Supreme Court that we talked about already, in which they shot down the idea of affirmative action that was designed to combat discrimination and bias based on race. What they're talking about with unconscious bias here is something that clearly the court didn't take into account, because the whimsical majority of the court's thoughts were, oh, well, discrimination isn't an issue anymore, and we just need to make it not an issue and make it go away, and we shouldn't have government get involved with that. But unconscious bias says that human beings, by their very nature, are biased. What are your thoughts on that?
I would honestly, agree with the science, obviously. I feel like everybody is biased, depending on, how you were raised, where you grew up, and really what you feel is what you learned was okay and not okay. I'll fully admit I'm a biased person when it comes to my own beliefs, and I can find it difficult to relate to people that don't necessarily share my experiences or have different perspectives. And I'm not saying that we can't, talk to each other even if we have, different beliefs and so forth. It's somewhat difficult when you kind of have a bias against somebody and you kind of have your own perceptions and stereotypes of them in a more unconscious way rather than more or less trying to have it purposefully.
And it's funny because the study almost seems to suggest that conscious bias that we're aware of is better than unconscious bias. Because when you're not aware that you're biased about something, you really can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And that unconscious bias may be something that's enforced from childhood. Maybe it's bias that your parents instilled on you. It could be cultural, it could be religious, it could be any number of things that has just been ingrained in you that you don't realize you have a bias against someone for something.
Yeah, and I feel like especially when it comes to unconscious bias versus conscious bias, it's a lot harder to kind of change your ways or even move past that bias when you don't know that you have it. I think that's kind of an obvious statement, but when you're conscious of a bias you have, you can obviously, that's like basically the first step, and you can take steps to eventually overcome that bias. But when you have an unconscious bias to something, it's much harder to actually realize that you had a bias, whether it was something you had through childhood or something that was just ingrained in your mind for however long you really knew. So I certainly would agree with the fact that conscious bias is probably it's probably easier to have, or it's better to have conscious bias. That way you know you have it and you can improve from it, rather than unconscious bias when you never actually realize it.
And I think the other important takeaway here is to understand that bias is natural.
Mm-hmm.
It's, to a certain extent, it is an instinctive survival trait that humans have had since, we were living in caves. It's that bias, that things that we perceive as being a threat to us or not being advantageous to us for our survival, or for our procreation, for our continued existence, we develop a bias against those things. So we try to weed those types of things out of the group mentality that we're in. Yeah. So it's not unusual to be biased. It's what you do with that bias and whether or not you allow that bias to result in injustices. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that not all biases, at least in that case, are necessarily bad. Like, yes, you can have biases related to your own survival. It's almost like with fear. I think that fear and bias can are kind of intertwined in some way, where it's like you kind of have a fear on something based on a bias you have with it. And some biases, it's okay to have some of them, because it's like, you feel yes, you can feel threatened by certain things. Obviously, some are certainly a bit more extreme, to where you should probably kind of reevaluate it when you can. But an important thing to note is that bias isn't necessarily a negative thing. And if somebody says that you have a bias, I don't think anyone should really be super defensive of it too much.
And you're absolutely right. It's one of those things where just because you're biased doesn't mean you're doing something, you're allowing it to force you into a negative action.
Yeah.
Biases allow us to unconsciously recognize differences in people. And a successful society understands there's differences, racial, religious, cultural, societal, and it's a matter of celebrating those differences. You turn those differences into an advantage for the overall society.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at it as one being superior over the other.
Yeah.
A lot of times, the differences that our biases key on are complementary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people, when they look at it from a discrimination standpoint, which is what a lot of people think of when they think of bias, the discrimination side of things is where you're recognizing those biases that you have, but then you're allowing them to rule your thoughts and allowing negative outcomes to come from them. Yeah. Whereas, we just had, this is a whimsical example, but we just had rotisserie chicken for dinner. Well, you like dark meat and I like white meat. Okay, they're biases. But that means that when we have a rotisserie chicken, it doesn't go to waste. The whole thing gets eaten at that point in time. So that's just a silly example of how you could take something where someone's biased against something and turn it into a positive type thing.
Yeah.
Do you ever run into bias, or what would be defined as unconscious bias in this case, in your day-to-day activities with friends or at school or out and about if you're in the mall or something like that? Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Yeah, kind of. Now, as much as I, want to say, don't judge a book by its cover or don't judge somebody by their own appearance, I feel like I unconsciously do that in a lot of instances, mainly as a way, of course, to seek out any threats, because sometimes I like to wear more bright and colorful stuff that might kind of set some people off, because I know it sets certain people off, and I'm worried about interacting or being near people that it would set off. So I kind of have an unconscious bias of, okay, who seems like they would be set off by the way that I look? And again, it's unconscious, and I really don't mean to be, thinking that way, but it's like, it's kind of just how it is for me.
Yeah. And I understand that. And a lot of people unconsciously judge appearances. And I'm a great example of that. I'm 6'4", 500 pounds. I'm an ogre, and I've accepted that. And I look like an ogre, but personality-wise, I'm generally a pretty nice guy to talk to and get along with.
Yeah, and I've also kind of had a similar thing, at least when it came to my appearance, because I've had a couple of people kind of mention it. I normally kind of wear dark clothes, at least when it comes to the winter and so forth. I normally cover up a lot, wearing leggings and a hoodie and such. And I've had multiple people mention that I look depressed that way, or that if I dressed a different way, I would seem happier, which I feel is kind of an unconscious bias on their part to the idea of oh, people who are depressed wear darker clothes and cover up more and don't seem to express themselves through their looks as much.
And that's a great example of unconscious biases. Oh, if you're depressed, just wear something brighter. You'll feel happier. And it's that's not the way that works.
Yeah, same thing with the idea of, oh, if you're sad, just smile more.
Right. Yeah, it's it takes a little bit more than that to solve those types of problems.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to look at some of the different common types of bias when we come back. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. Today we're talking about unconscious bias, and now we're going to talk about some of the common types of bias. So the first we have is affinity bias. Parenting is hard, and we're told that playing favorites is wrong. And so as parents, we struggle to make sure everything is fair. I'm not a parent, by the way.
I probably should have read that segment.
Yeah,
but okay.
I'm just gonna say I'm not a parent, but okay.
You have a cat.
Sure, we'll go with that. That works. But if you have a sibling or you're a parent yourself, it isn't difficult to tell who the favorite is. And for that, you can place the blame squarely on affinity bias. Affinity bias is the tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. We favor those who have something in common with us. So as a parent, a child who plays the same sport you did in high school, or who has your creative gene, is usually the one you relate to the most and are the closest with.
So I'm going to ask you a very controversial question at this point.
Oh boy.
Who do you think is my favorite, you or Sam?
I'd probably say Sam, considering if we're going strictly based off of this bias, you have a lot more in common with Sam. He was your first child, and you probably relate to him a lot more, so...
Really?
Strictly on affinity bias, I'd say that he's your favorite.
See, and I don't want to cop out and say that I don't have favorites. A lot of parents want to say that.
Yeah.
But I really don't. For me, and this is obviously off topic, but for me, you guys each have different aspects of my personality that I connect with.
Yeah.
So obviously I see you more because you're living here in the house with us. And as a result, when I do see Sam, he and I wind up kind of monopolizing the conversation because I don't see him very often.
Yeah.
But I don't think I favor one of you over the other.
And I mean, I will say that I think you and I do have stuff in common. Like, despite the fact I really hate reading, I have your, talent for writing. Well, I wouldn't say talent, but desire for writing.
From a creative standpoint, I think we are very much on par.
Outside of all my other creative stuff.
Well, I may not be able to do the artistic stuff that you do, but I can certainly take a step back and give you an independent opinion of it that provides value to you, I hope.
Yeah.
So anyway, just wanted to say I don't have favorites.
All right.
Just for the record.
Cool.
So the next bias that we have is Halo bias. I know this is not the Microsoft game Halo. First impressions have a lot to do with the halo effect. For example, let's say you have a friend your parents like because she was polite or got great grades. They don't worry when you hang out together and allow you to stay out later with them. You might not get a lot of the usual questions a parent would ask about where are you going and what time will you be home. So it's a win-win for everyone. However, you soon learn she shoplifted, she cheated on exams, and was into whatever the new illicit trend was at the time. So you stop hanging out with that friend because you realize she wasn't a good influence. Your parents, however, can't wrap their heads around it. They can't believe they were so wrong about her. Even after she's suspended from school, they still ask whatever happened to that nice friend you had.
The halo effect is our tendency to think everything about a person is good because our first impression of them was good. In this case, the parents liked the friend. She came from a good family and she was polite. The same thing happens to all of us.
I think that "at" probably wasn't supposed to be in there.
Okay, yeah, I was confused.
This is why I like to do read-throughs.
Why didn't we do one then?
Oh, because we're going to flub it, and we flubbed it. All right, moving on.
Think about a student who has a big project that they make great success of, but who hasn't lived up to it since. In fact, this person is coming in late, making a lot of mistakes, and routinely relies on others to get her work done on time. Yet the teacher rates her highly based on the perception that she's a great student. This student is just like the teenage friend.
Now, do you know anyone like that?
Anyone that, has good stuff and then just doesn't do good stuff later on?
Well, anyone who is perceived by people as being someone who you know them not to be.
I mean, kind of. I had this one friend who was also one of the friends that said, had the unconscious bias that if I, dressed differently, I wouldn't be depressed.
Your fashion friend, right, got it.
I'm not gonna... So, they were a good student because they were in a higher class because they were in my advanced geometry class. However, when I talked with them at lunch, because we had the same lunch period, they were a completely different person and somehow admitted some really weird stuff,
Well, don't get into details.
Yeah, but it was weird stuff to where it's I don't know why, I never perceived that of them, and they would just casually say it to me and my other friend, and we were both kind of weirded out by it, so.
Okay, so that would be a yes.
Yes, I should have gone with a more simpler answer then.
So the next type of bias is perception bias. So perception bias is the tendency to form stereotypes and assumptions about certain groups that make it difficult to make an objective judgment about individual members of those groups. While affinity bias and halo effect tend to be specific to an individual and our perception of them, perception bias is typically based on a larger labeling of a group and influences everyone associated with that group. Meaning if we had an experience that our neighbor's child who volunteers at a local retirement community is generous and helpful, when you meet another child who has also volunteered in the similar way, you would have a difficult time seeing any negative traits. We apply the same logic to people we encounter in life. A study published by the National Academy of Sciences determined there's an assumption that men are better suited for science and technology-related projects than women. So how does that affect women? As an example, when hiring for a web designer, a search engine optimization analyst, or a data scientist, if 9 out of 10 candidates are men, it's difficult to put aside the perception that anyone else can be successful in those types of jobs and hire a woman.
Our experience has shown us that men work in these roles, not women, so we gravitate towards the perception we are accustomed to. While there are many programs in place to increase the number of women in the fields, the disparity cannot be addressed until women are perceived as just as capable as men in traditionally male-dominated fields. The problem actually lies in the bias that makes those assumptions in the first place, and not as much in the hiring process. If the bias is based on stereotype rather than fact, the act of overlooking underrepresented groups of people will continue. If we don't stop and question when the bias is reinforced by the inequality we see, then we will continue to believe and perpetuate them. Perpetuate them, sorry.
You're not going to perpetrate them. That would be a crime.
Sorry. Tackling the underlying unconscious bias can be achieved by acknowledging the problem exists, ensuring there is widespread awareness of it, resolving to do something about it, and becoming accountable for your actions.
So I can talk kind of from firsthand experience with this. When I do hiring at work, I'm always hiring for a technical position. Either it's a IT related or development or what have you. And the last couple of positions I had posted jobs for was for development positions. And it was probably a 10-to-1 ratio of men to women applying for the positions. And trying to be an equal opportunity employer when it comes to gender, race, everything, it's very difficult to find suitable candidates that fit the requirements when you have such a disparity like that in the applicant pool.
Mm-hmm.
So I try, the one particular position, the best candidate that I had in the pool happened to be this young lady who was very talented. I would have really liked to have hired her. And in fact, we'd even offered her a position, but we couldn't come to terms on the financial numbers. But there were probably, for that one highly qualified candidate, there was probably 8 other male candidates that were as qualified or slightly less. So it's very difficult to kind of not have a bias when your applicant pool is that sideways, Yeah. I don't really have a solution for that. I try to consider everyone based on their merits. And if I look at everyone and I don't look at a name and I just look at their qualifications, I can usually pick the people out of a applicant pool that would be the best person. And then from there, I try not to let unconscious bias filter into that scenario. Maybe I do. Maybe I'm unconsciously biased to female applicants because of the influence that you and mommy have on me and how much you've opened my eyes to I don't want to get dramatic and say the plight of women, but the conditions that women, have to exist in the workforce. And maybe I'm trying to do my part to ease that, and maybe it's a reverse bias. I don't know. It's like I'm just overanalyzing it at this point.
Yeah.
But I can speak from experience that's a problem in the workforce for sure. So the next one we have is one that I experience all the time, and that's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is described as seeking out evidence that confirms our initial perceptions, ignoring contrary information. It's a little like a debate. Each side prepares for their argument with facts, figures, and studies that will support their position, and they will disregard or find fault with the opposing viewpoint to win the debate. Confirmation bias gets on one side of that debate and allows us to only accept what supports our argument. Confirmation bias can make a bad situation worse because we become stubborn and refuse to change our opinion. We seek out information, evidence that justifies our position or makes us feel like we're right or wrong. And contrary to that, we may wind up ignoring evidence that's presented to us that is against our argument at the same time.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say Bob has an idea for a new product that he believes will be well received by the public. He does market research and presents findings that support his initial idea. When his coworker presents data that shows the product won't be profitable, Bob discounts it. Bob has data. His coworker has data. Both people believe their data proves the point. Confirmation bias becomes a problem when Bob pushes the product to market based solely on his data.
To combat confirmation bias, we need to review the data we have in our possession, all of it. Review the pros and the cons to objectively make a decision based on both sides of the data. Look for data that disproves your point, and ask others to review your conclusions. The best way to get over confirmation bias is to find someone who is unbiased that you can present both sides to.
And this is something that's done in the scientific circles all the time. You see a lot of people that will publish papers in journals to try to garner support for their theories and their projects and what they're working on. But when there are studies that are published that aren't peer-reviewed, they're almost scoffed at right off the bat automatically. So the idea of peer review in science is very important. When other people look at the work that you did and either review the work and the data or take the work you did and try to reproduce it to support your theory, it lends credence to what you're doing. And for people to not seek out the peer review is really a rush to judgment. And then what happens is you get a lot of people that come out and talk about, well, there was one that was recently in the news about this new compound that was found that would be used as a superconductor at room temperature. So just a little aside, superconductors exist in the world today, and they're used for fusion and various supercomputing things and stuff like that. But they all have to be super cooled to near absolute zero.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when you go for an MRI at the hospital, it uses superconducting magnets that are supercooled by helium, liquid helium. So this material that they discovered and did some testing on could have the same properties of a superconductor, but without the supercooling. It could do it at room temperature. And they published a paper. Well, they had some people that came out and supported it, but you had some people come out and say, well, nobody reviewed this stuff. Nobody looked at this. Nobody checked your data or anything like that. This is nothing but a theory at this point in time. And they basically discredited all the work that they did because of the confirmation bias. So when you're in that sort of situation, you have to be objective enough to have your theories tested. If you lack sufficient confidence in your argument to have it stand up to scrutiny and debate, then you don't have an argument at that point in time.
Yeah.
Can you think of any examples where people put forth their ideas and either ridicule or discredit or don't want to hear anyone who has a contrary point of view?
Yeah.
That was a softball I tossed up there for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like it's kind of easy to be, find that now, unfortunately, because so many people are like so headstrong in their own beliefs that they won't even do their own research. They'll just like say that like they'll find like the one source that agrees with them that again probably wasn't peer reviewed, so it's probably inaccurate anyway, and will, pretty much go headfirst into keeping it. And I'll say I probably also have that kind of bias because, I try to get multiple sources, but for the most part, when it comes to discrediting people, I kind of just look up the first thing I see to show that the other person didn't really do their research first. But then again, I should also be looking at other sources that also, one, disagree with my statement, but two, are also, again, peer-reviewed. And that's also kind of why, we encourage everybody else to do their own research. While we try not to be one-sided when it comes to our podcast, we're only really one source, and there are plenty other sources out there that will agree with us, disagree with us, or kind of be a midpoint between both arguments. So, that's kind of why we encourage everybody to do their own research and get as many sources as they can. And I guess that's why, in school, they kind of have us look up multiple different sources for our different things so that we're not looking at just one singular source.
Yeah, when you're basing your entire political argument on a single source from Newsmax, you're kind of treading on thin ice there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and one of the things is that when we do research for these podcasts, usually each segment comes from a different source, so we can try to provide different perspectives. It's not the end-all, be-all. We're not a scientific organization here. We're not a think tank. Go out and do your own research.
Yep.
We're going to take our last break here, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit more about the basis of unconscious bias. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
We are talking unconscious bias today on Insights into Teens, and we're going to talk about the basis of unconscious bias. A professor of economics at the University of Texas at Austin studied the relationship between personal attributes and economics. He confirmed that skinny people make more money than overweight people. Tall men are promoted more often than short men. White women are paid more than black women, and much more than Latino women. Bald men make less money than men with a full head of hair, yet men in general are paid more than women. That means that a fat, bald female if she's Latino, doesn't get paid anything. Differently abled and LGBTQ professionals make less than men across the board as well. So why does this type of bias happen? It's unlikely anyone sets out to do this on purpose, yet
some of
it, I kind of take exception to that, but it happens consistently enough and on a large enough scale for it to be studied. Well, bias has been around long enough that it should have been studied for quite some time.
Yeah.
If someone has an attribute we find favorable, subconsciously, we think that person is good, and of course we want to associate with good people. It's this unconscious need to categorize people that leads to the kinds of decisions that favor some and leave others out.
According to studies in cognitive science, our brains receive 11 million pieces of information every second, and we only possess 40 of those process 40 of those details consciously. This makes us more than 99% unconscious.
Which makes me sound like we're really stupid then.
Yeah, really. The unconscious brain is working to minimize how much energy it uses by automating certain predictions and perspectives. This automation allows us to have more energy and awareness in case we need to respond to threats. Our minds are working with what it is exposed to and stores evidence for, which means it has no inherent idea of right, wrong, good, bad, truth, or lie unless we ascribe it or learn it from others. Which means that whenever I flub any of these lines, it's only because I'm doing it unconsciously or something like that. This lack of awareness or attention to our perspectives means we don't realize just how biased we are. Ask anyone if they're biased, and very few will admit it. You know, it's one of those things that people might even feel insulted by.
Absolutely.
And those who are unaware of just how deep the bias actually runs. So pinpointing bias is hard, but not impossible. According to the Cognitive Bias Codex Cognitive Bias Codex.
You'll get it.
Created.
That's why we need to do read-throughs.
Then do read-throughs. There are an estimated 180 cognitive biases, and the list is frequently updated. This codex is a useful tool for visually representing all of the known biases that exist to date. You may have heard of the term cognitive bias as a synonym for unconscious bias, but cognitive bias is not a synonym for heuristics.
Heuristics are nuanced, and the Cognitive Bias Codex organizes biases in a meaningful way while listing heuristics and biases under the same label. Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, explains the difference. He says heuristics are the shortcuts that humans use to reduce task complexity in judgment and choice, and biases are the assumptions we make based upon those shortcuts. Our assumptions affect our behavior, and our behavior affects everyone around us. By understanding that we're all biased, we can make the decision to work together to be more conscious of our thoughts and actions when relating to others. And while we can't always stop ourselves in the moment, we can think about our actions to see why we chose a particular person for a task or put a specific individual on a team. We can ask what made us act and think in that way towards this person or group. And then if need be, we can remedy that situation. We can put our eggs. Whoa. Let's back that one off. That's a big flub today. We can put our egos aside, and along with our eggs, over in a basket somewhere.
But not all in one.
Not all in one, right. And admit we have made a decision based upon a bias. We can interrupt the biases and acknowledge them. And not only can we address the current situation, we can resolve to not do it again. Over time, it's possible to learn to think and behave differently. By using an objective test to measure our bias and by reflecting on our actions, we can change the way in which we are biased. And I guess that's really the moral of the story here, is that everybody is unconsciously biased and doesn't realize it usually. But by paying attention to your actions, by being aware of the world around you, by understanding the impact of your actions on others, you can become consciously biased. And if you can become consciously biased, then you can change.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that you've had unconscious biases that you've had to overcome in your lifetime so far?
I mean, yeah, both in my own unconscious bias and the unconscious bias of those around me. I do tend to gravitate towards those that, are like me, have similar opinions of me, because I find it hard to talk to people who don't have, similar opinions to me, mainly just because it's just difficult to, form a conversation when we consistently disagree on viewpoints. So it can be kind of difficult to do that, and having that bias can occasionally help me to not have to deal with that. But I think it's something that I kind of have to learn to overcome, because, not all people that are not all people that believe in that, at least when it comes to being political and having different political beliefs, not everybody who has a different political belief to mine is like this heightened stereotype we tend to have of, separate parties and, parties that don't agree with us and, stuff like that. So I feel like it's something I could eventually overcome. It's, again, probably going to take some work, because much like with every bias, I do it unconsciously for the most part. And, the first step is to make that unconscious bias a conscious bias. So
That is very well put. I've been very fortunate in my life. I grew up in a household that was racially biased and gender biased and religiously biased. My father was a very closed-minded individual, and that closed-mindedness was passed down to us. And over the years, especially since I've been with Mommy, I've been enlightened, I should say. I've been very fortunate that Mommy has been such a positive influence on me and helped to open my eyes. She's made me a better person in the almost 20 years now that we've been together. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't have that kind of influence in their lives, which is sad. I think the world would be a better place if there were more mommies around, like my wife, that can help people understand where some of these biases are and how to correct them. I'd like to think, as a result of that, I'm a better, more enlightened, more understanding person, and I've been very fortunate to have her guidance to get me to that point. Granted, there's a long way for me still to go. I am far from perfect. You've opened my eyes to a great number of things in the recent years that I had clearly been biased against in the past, and I think that's really the key: having enlightened people and having a diverse group of people that you're exposed to on a regular basis allows you to discover those biases and helps you to overcome them.
yeah, I definitely think that's something I hope to improve on later on, because most of my friends at least, I associate with kind of have all these similar beliefs to mine. And I feel that's more or less an unconscious bias on my part. And it'd be nice to have friends who, have differing opinions, where we don't fight over it consistently, but we both get different perspectives on each other's lives, and can hopefully learn to break our unconscious biases of each other and our beliefs.
Yeah, it's boring agreeing with everybody all the time. There's a certain part of me that enjoys that. It's conflict, but it's civilized conflict. It's debate. It's open discussion. They're the types of things that help to expand your mind.
Yeah, kind of similar to the silly debates that you and I have.
Exactly. And, it helps you to think of things. Like, a while back, I had run a website and a blog that was very contrary to my personal beliefs. And it was so that I could then look at situations from the opposite side of the spectrum and try to put myself in the shoes of the opposing party. And it was educational. It was entertaining in some respects too. But it was one of those things where I found it fascinating to see the reactions at times and see how stubborn and how set in people's ways people could be. And they were reflections of who I was before I went through that little thought experiment.
Hmm.
So I think that's all we had for today. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and we will get your closing thoughts.
Alrighty.
We'll be right back.
Okay, so to everybody out there, I kind of just want to reaffirm the idea that we all have our own biases, whether unconscious or conscious. But everybody has a bias no matter who you are, and some of those biases aren't necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of just human nature that we have biases in order so that we can, determine threats and whatnot. However, some of those biases can go a bit too far, and some of them are just incredibly unconscious to where you're not willing to admit it. And I guess the important thing to note is that it's not a bad thing to admit that you have a bias. The important thing is that you move past that bias once you become aware of it, rather than completely denying it and refusing to change your ways.
Okay. Sage words, as always.
Thank you.
Before we do go, I do want to once again invite all of our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. You can find audio versions of just this podcast listed as Insights into Teens. And we're pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast: Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, and so forth. I would also invite you to give us your feedback. Email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can hit us up on Twitter at Insight or X, whatever it's called now. I refuse to call it X, though, because it's such a stupid name. We're at Insights_Things. You can find high-res versions of all of our videos on YouTube at youtube.com/insightsintothings. We do stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. And you can find all those and more, links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. And you.
And don't forget to check out our other two podcasts, Insights into Entertainment, hosted by you and Mommy, and Insights into Tomorrow, our occasional podcast that sometimes comes on, hosted by you and my brother Sam.
Wow, you have a future in marketing for us, I'll tell you that.
Thank you very much.
That's all. Another one in the books.
Bye, everyone.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Your hosts are Joseph and Madison Whalen, a father and daughter team making their way through the challenges of the teenage years.
Welcome to Insights into Teens. This is episode 176. Distorting Parental Rights. I'm your co-host, your host. What am I, the host? I'm the host,
I'm pretty
right?
sure you're the host.
I'm the host, Joseph Whalen, and my intelligent and in-touch co-host, Madison Whalen.
Hi, everybody.
How you doing today, Maddie?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Doing all right. So today's topic is going along with a series that we had tried to kind of stick to a theme of controversial topics.
Yep.
And I think this is probably the hottest one that we've had to deal with so far.
Yep, I would also probably tend to agree.
And this one is kind of ripped right out of the recent headlines, too. So I thought this was worthwhile having a discussion about.
Yeah.
So there have been a lot of talk about parental rights from prominent conservative personalities. This is a topic often associated with LGBTQ rights, the history of slavery in our country, and other sensitive topics. Laws are being passed in some states that are essentially changing the history and culture of our nation to fit a false narrative in the name of parental rights. Today, we're going to talk about some of these initiatives, what they're based on, what reality really is, and how these politically motivated ideologies are adversely affecting our kids in the name of political agendas. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to actually thank our audience for pushing our Insights into Things podcast beyond the 50,000 download mark.
Yay!
We hit that earlier this week. Thank you very much for that. That means I won't bug anyone to subscribe to the podcast because apparently people obviously are.
Yeah.
I would, however, invite you to give us your feedback right in. Tell us how we're doing. Comments on some of the topics that we're talking about. We're willing to discuss anything that the audience wants to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things. Or you can find links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get into it?
I think we shall.
Here we go. Let the fur fly. For kids in school, the focus should be on math, science, reading, history, and the other subjects and learning habits that will set them up as good, productive citizens in the world. I think most parents would agree with that.
Yeah.
But these efforts have been sidelined by campaigns mounted in the name of, quote, parental rights. Some parents are demanding that books be banned from curricula and school libraries, targeting teachers and administrators based on viewpoints and fighting for control of various boards of education. There are no question that parents deserve a say in shaping their children's educations. They have moral and legal responsibility for their children and the freedom to make fundamental decisions for their families. But the rallying cry of parents' rights is being wielded to do far more than give parents their rightful voice. It's turning public schools into political battlegrounds, fracturing communities, and diverting time and energy away from teaching and learning.
The current parents' rights movement goes well beyond the usual channels of dialogue between families and schools, such as parent-teacher conferences, PTA meetings, and calls to the principal. The movement is an organized nationwide effort waged by advocacy groups, including Moms of Liberty, the Parental Rights Foundation, and No Left Turn in Education. Their aim is to activate parents... No. Advocate?
No, activate.
All right. Their aim is to activate parents to contest what is taught in the classroom, what books are available to students, and the professional authority of teachers, administrators, and librarians to carry out their work. This campaign goes well beyond a judicious effort to prompt reconsideration of controversial aspects of certain school curricula or questions of age appropriateness of certain materials and narratives. Rather, its methods center on censorship and are chilling speech in classrooms across the country.
So it's worthwhile pausing there just for a moment to kind of talk about that. So when they say they're talking about activating parents, basically what you have is you have a bunch of special interest groups out there that have their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get that agenda passed, they're riling up parents with this false narrative of, well, if you don't do something about it, it's going to ruin your children's future.
Yeah, and that's something I've certainly seen a lot currently. It's like the main focus is now on the children for some reason when it comes to literally everything. And now the topics that are like being popular now are like things that we have to worry about the children.
And you know, the rallying cry of it's for the children has been one that is being used and abused by politicians for generations now. Because it's one of those things where well, if I'm doing this for the children and you're against me, then you must be against the children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a case of basically gaslighting. And we've talked about gaslighting in the past.
Yep.
The idea of if you're not for me, then you're against me.
Mm-hmm.
It's used as a divisive metaphor, basically tear down any type of organized opposition by saying, well, if you don't support this, then you don't support kids, so you must be a terrible person.
Yeah, and that's something that both sides can kind of have problems with in the ways
Absolutely.
that, like, they try to find, like, anybody that kind of argues politically can, like, it can go south if you, like, try to find a reason to think that the person that you're arguing against is morally wrong because what you stand for is technically morally right.
Right. That's like saying, well, I'm for world peace and you're not, so you must be a warmonger.
Yeah.
And it's like if your idea of world peace is just giving in and submitting to tyrannical rule. Ukraine, not to get political, but Ukraine is a great example of that. People that are supporting Ukraine and Ukraine's freedom to exist against an illegal war that's being waged by Russia are now having the tables turned on them, saying they're warmongers because Ukraine should just go to the negotiating table and cut a deal with Russia so that the fighting stops.
Yeah.
And the people that are saying that are basically saying, well, you just need to give Russia what they want. And if you don't do that, then you're a warmonger. You want this war to continue.
Yeah, and that's like, and obviously while it's a less extreme example here in the US, it's still something that's being waged in the ways of like, oh, well, if you're not, I'm doing this for the children. I'm telling you that
Exactly.
I'm doing it for the children. It doesn't mean that if, well, I don't know. It's just,
It's what's called a straw man argument. Basically, you're propping up a what if hypothetical situation out there and saying, well, if you don't support that, then you're terrible.
Mhm.
And it's a form of psychology that has been used in the past, but it's being used by some very not nice people, like the Nazis, for instance, and fascist Italy have used these type of techniques. And the scary thing is that our political system today and these special interest groups are now turning to these tactics because they're very effective tactics.
yeah, because like with straw man arguments, a lot of the times, like, they can't be debated with.
Right.
And that's like the problem with it. It's like, I'm all for people debating different topics, but when you use straw man tactics of saying, well, I'm completely in the right because I'm supporting this, so that means that if you're trying to argue with me, then you're completely wrong.
Right.
That's not going to leave any room for debate because apparently that you're the person that's supposedly in the right, so you can't really be debated with.
Right. And there's no chance of reasoning with people that go down that path anyway. It might be worthwhile for us to do a podcast on straw man arguments and where some of the flaws are. But let's get back on topic.
Yeah.
So in Alpine, Utah, 52 books, including Judy Blume's Forever and Jodi Picoult's 19 Minutes, were pulled from school library shelves after an internal audit initiated by the school board determined that they contained sensitive material and lacked literary merit. Now, who makes that determination is kind of really what's up for debate. After an outcry, the district pulled back slightly, limiting access to the targeted books to students whose parents opt in and make them available to their kids. Which makes sense. If the whole thing is about parental rights and parents having power to determine what their kids can and can't see, then the parents should be making these decisions.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be getting legislatures and politicians involved.
Absolutely.
However, in Florida, Missouri, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and other states, campaigns have spurred the passage of new laws to limit the availability of books in schools, sometimes under penalty of steep fines for teachers or punishment for librarians. librarians. There's an extra R in there somewhere.
Yep.
I don't know. You understood what I said. I didn't need that extra R. I'll save that one for another word.
Yeah.
PEN America has documented more than 2,500 book removals in the 9 months between July 2021 and June 2022. The accelerating pace of book bans across the country might suggest that such measures are popular. But surveys show, I feel like I'm doing a game show, survey says? Surveys show that upwards of 70% of Americans, including both Democrats and Republicans, oppose these bans. A 2022 Harris poll revealed just 12% of respondents favor banning books on divisive topics. In the name of vindicating their rights, parents with special interests are pursuing tactics that the overwhelming majority of parents and citizens reject. And let me pause there again just for a second. In the 1930s, and I want to keep going back to this, and people probably are not going to like it, but in the 1930s, when the Nazis were coming to power, the first thing they did was start banning and burning books. As soon as you control the knowledge that people get, you can define what history is and what your place in history is.
Yep.
There's no such thing as bad knowledge,
Yeah.
regardless of what the church may tell you.
And I'm not going to lie, I'm going to go back even further. I remember when I was learning about ancient Egypt and that, whenever there was a new pharaoh, they would basically, like, the hieroglyphs from the other pharaohs, they would pretty much, like, destroy them and, like, hammer in hieroglyphs over them to basically rewrite the history and make the history lost to the other pharaohs.
Anytime you look to control the knowledge that's disseminated to your population, it's an attempt to control history. And all it is it's an attempt to control the population, really.
Yep.
So this is why we learn history. We learn history so that when history repeats itself, we have a reference point that we can go back to and say, see where we went last time we allowed this to happen? And it's a warning sign so that we don't go down that path again, because we already had one Hitler in history. We don't need another one.
Yeah.
The Nazis have no place in our society anymore. So we have to keep that in mind when we talk about these things.
So the origins of the parental rights movement reveal why its new focus on restricting school curricula and reading lists is so distorted and counterproductive. Michael P. Ferris, the driving force behind the Parental Rights Foundation, was an architect of the homeschooling movement, advocating for parents who wish to educate their children privately at home. Homeschooling won adherents in the 1970s and 80s as court rulings, including in a 1986 Tennessee case in which Ferris was an attorney, rejected parents' efforts to get certain books, including Macbeth, removed from the curriculum on the grounds that they offended families' religious beliefs. When these litigants failed to enlist the support of courts to impose their religious preferences in public school classrooms, Ferris and his allies shifted tactics, seeking to be, quote, left alone by the government to educate their children as they saw fit.
So they want to be left alone by the government, but now they're lobbying the government to pass rules in their favor.
Yeah.
Right. And if you have books out there that offend families' religious beliefs, don't read them. It's wonderful having choice and having choice in society.
I know, right?
The new efforts of the past few years represent a return to Ferris's original approach. In 2007, Ferris launched ParentalRights.org, a group that is now at the forefront of mobilizing parents against what its website describes as expert agents of the state, namely teachers, librarians, and principals. He says that as though they're a terrible thing. Expert agents of the state. Oh, you mean teachers? Oh, yeah, those teachers have nefarious intent, right? Okay, sure. ParentalRights.org's current president, Will Estrada, has celebrated the movement's rising influence, saying, quote, "We've been speaking into the void, whereas now suddenly everyone cares about parental rights." ParentalRights.org played a key organizing role in passing Parents' Bill of Rights laws in Florida and Georgia, which impose heavy administrative burdens on teachers, make it easier for individual parents to challenge curricular materials for all students in a school district, and target LGBTQ affirming practices, because why not?
Yep.
Many similar bills have been proposed in other states and may well become law in the coming years.
The parental rights rhetoric campaigned by Ferris has become a staple of some conservative attacks on public education. At a conference of the conservative Moms for Liberty, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis spoke about the importance of parents being able to challenge the books available at schools. The conference included a session on, quote, gender ideology in our schools, a movement that for years sought to prevent the government from controlling how they educated their own children, now seeks to decree what entire student bodies and school districts can and cannot learn and read. The rhetoric of parents' rights has morphed from a movement aimed at constraining the power of the government over education to one that is mobilizing politicians and legislators to extend the heavy hand of the government into the classroom.
So you just look at the name of these organizations, right? So you look at Moms for Liberty. Oh, they must be genuine, good, God-loving American people, right? Just because you put it in your name doesn't mean that you're looking for liberty. These are people in an organization with liberty in the name who are deliberately looking to restrict what other people can do.
Mm-hmm.
That's not liberty.
Yep.
That's dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
The Parents' Bill of Rights, because it's all about the parents. It's a Bill of Rights that restricts what parents can and can't choose, because the people that are writing these laws are the ones that are choosing for the parents.
Yep.
So it's really a bad job of hiding propaganda is what this is.
Mm-hmm.
It's people who want control. And the vast majority of people who are active in things like this, it's all about control. You're going to sit there and tell me that, well, parents deserve the right to choose, but here's a law that tells you what you have to choose.
Yeah.
It's what we call hypocrisy.
Yeah, and it's just it's like one parent can complain about one book and then it's ruined for everybody.
Exactly. If something offends you, don't read it. Don't have your kid read it. Don't ruin it. Macbeth. Okay. There isn't Shakespeare is like the penultimate source for everything since his time.
Yeah.
To ban books that he wrote is a pretty desperate ploy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the subject matter of Macbeth because it's a good portion of it's anti-conformism. And they don't want things that spark people's thoughts. They want control. If they control the thinking, then they control the population.
Yeah.
We're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about more good news about parental rights. We'll be right back.
Yippee.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. Today we're talking about distorting parental rights. So a recent
Exactly.
words are hard. So, a recent report from PEN America on book bans documented how groups organizing under the banner of parental rights curate and publicize lists of books that they view as, quote, indoctrination.
Which is the ultimate irony here, really.
Yep, certainly. They then present those lists to district officials, and then administrators remove the challenged books from school shelves. Establish processes for reviewing challenged books objectively to determine if concerns are founded are swept aside as books are banned wholesale. The report found that proposed or enacted legislation, as well as political pressure from lawmakers, played a direct role in over 1,100 bans across the country, or in at least 40% of the bans. Spontaneous, sweeping book bans have become an alarming new norm, in which titles are removed at the slightest sight of complaint from parents or lawmakers.
You know, this reminds me a lot about the 1950s Red Scare of Joseph McCarthy, where he saw communists everywhere, didn't have a shred of evidence to anything, and wound up ruining people's lives, all in the name of more political power for himself. And that's exactly where this is going here.
Mm-hmm.
As stakeholders in the school system, and simply as citizens, parents should participate in deciding how schools are run. Their voices deserve to be heard alongside the expert judgment of principals, teachers, and librarians. But to use legislation and mandates to declare certain stories and ideas off limits violates the compact underpinning public education. Parents who opt out of public schools, rather than private academies or homeschooling, are signing up for a system who opt for, not opt out of, Parents who choose public schools are signing up for a system designed to serve entire communities and general interests. They're pooling their resources with other families to raise future generations. You ever hear the idea it takes a village to raise a child?
Yep.
That's what this is. It's one thing to believe that parents have the right to forego regular schooling in favor of imparting an individual belief system to children at home. It's quite another to insist that public school curricula and libraries be remade to match those predilections.
These tactics also risk denying and defeating children's own sense of educational and intellectual agency. Efforts by parents to dictate what books their teens read and subjects they study stand in the way of allowing children to develop the autonomy and judgment they will need in adulthood. Schools should breed critical thinking such that no book or lesson has the power to indoctrinate a worldview. A major purpose of a library, a broad curriculum, and of the protection of free speech itself is the notion that exposure to the panoply of available ideas and narratives is what enables us to form and test our own opinions and beliefs.
The same tensions provoking these battles are also roiling society more broadly. Social and generational shifts in thinking about racial justice, sexual orientation, and gender identity have stoked concerns in some quarters about how marriages, families, and society at large may be changing in unrecognizable or irreversible ways. The impulse of parents to shield their children from what seems like an alien social force and values is age-old. The challenge is compounded in an era in which traditional geographic boundaries that demarcated communities are eroded by online platforms that make traditional controls on what children see, hear, and know virtually impossible to enforce. Some parents who find themselves raising children in an information ecosystem run amok have sought to more aggressively police the arenas they can control, training their sights on the public school classroom and library.
Self-proclaimed parents' rights organization... Sorry. Let me try that again.
Sure, we'll rewind that one.
Sorry about that. Self-proclaimed parents' rights organizations play on those fears. They have turned their backs on time-honored models of dialogue and partnership between parents and schools, stoking the belief that the threats they perceive demand government intrusion. In some communities, frustration over pandemic school closures and learning loss has bred resentment and distrust of administrators and teachers, fueling confrontational approaches. The American Federation of Teachers has reported a precipitous jump in the number of educators quitting their jobs over the last few years. Meanwhile, children who suffered learning loss and mental health challenges during the pandemic find themselves in school environments racked by tension, where their own rights and interests are often an afterthought.
In an era of intensifying polarization and fragmentation, public schools are among the few unifying institutions with the potential to help solder together a diverse rising generation of Americans, ready and equipped to live together, solve problems, and help build a better nation. If parents are worried about the books their children may find in school, they can speak to a teacher or librarian, and even more importantly, engage with their child about the values and stories they wish to emphasize. The phrase parents' rights may have a nice ring to it, but the agenda now afoot in its name should sound alarms for all those who care about the future of public education. Now, they make a very interesting point in the last half of this article here, that a lot of the anxiety that parents face, and I'm one of the ones that face it as well, is that you get to a certain age, and I don't know what that age is, where you look at the world today and you say, well, this isn't how it was when I grew up. And when I grew up, you didn't have the internet, or you didn't have computers, or, whatever it was. And they make the point that it scares parents. The information that is available to you today is vastly more expansive than what I had as a kid.
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of censorship that I impose on you and have imposed on you, for your own protection. And when you get to the technology that's in schools now, you start losing a lot of that control. So they make a valid point about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I do understand the idea of parental control. Like, the world can be a very scary place, and the idea of it changing from how you had once known it is certainly understandable in the ways that you're not able to control your kid as much as you wished you normally could. And, in a way to more protect them rather than basically looming over them about literally everything. So I certainly understand why parents have, the concern that, their kids are going to be raised in a world that they don't personally understand and with values they don't personally know or personally believe in. So I can certainly understand, the point that parents are trying to make in the ways of actually having parental rights and a say in what their kids learn, because some parents might not want their kids to learn about certain topics until they're a certain age, or they might not want them to learn about certain topics ever. And, I can certainly understand at least that viewpoint because, yeah, it can be scary. Who knows what the world's gonna look like in, 10, 30, 20 years even. It's
Not necessarily that order.
Well, yeah, I probably should have gone lower first. I don't know. I'm trying to,
No, but you make a very valid point. And they reinforce this fear by pointing out the fact that, things were really screwed up during COVID. You went through it as a student. You know how screwed up it was. You thrived in it, though, fortunately. And I think that's a testament to your intelligence and personality. But a lot of kids suffered. A lot of kids did not learn at the pace that they needed to learn. And the world just paused. But these kids' schooling continued, and it continued in a way that took all of these tools that parents are afraid of because they don't have control and threw it at them. And there was no organization to it. There was no controls that were put in place. There were no safeties that were put in place. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic is over, and you the genie's out of the bottle. You can't pull back from these things now.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of people, a lot of parents that are kind of frazzled by that and scared. And what you're seeing now, I think, is really a knee-jerk reaction to a lot of that stuff. I don't know a better way of dealing with it. Society tends to be a pendulum, right? So it swings to the left, it swings to the right, it spends some time in the middle there. As long as you don't swing too far to either side, society pretty much goes on as normal.
Yeah.
When you start making these changes out of fear and anxiety, and their knee-jerk changes, and you're putting them into law, that's where you start swinging too far, because it's easy to make a law compared to how hard it is to recall a law.
Yeah.
And when you start making laws that are pulling, because really what we're talking about is taking decision-making out of the hands of the parents, except for this few that are lobbying the politicians to make these laws. But what happens when the shoe's on the other foot? And when these people who convince these politicians to make these laws realize in a few years that these weren't the best laws to make, and now it's hindering our children, what are we going to do then?
Yeah.
So there's consequences to it.
Yeah, and the one thing that I've certainly kind of taken away from this, so yes, I understand that parents would want to possibly, especially due to the pandemic and them having a lot more resources to see the broader aspect of the world, I understand that some parents are fearful because they don't want their kids learning about the world just yet. They don't want their kids to really be experiencing all that stuff just yet. And while I understand that concern, I'm also of the mindset that at some point they're gonna have to learn about it. And obviously, when they learn about it is certainly up for debate. What's the best age to teach them about certain topics? Like, I can certainly understand, like, the constant struggle of when is it okay to teach this and when is it okay to talk about this, and, like, especially specifically what age would be best. And really, it's hard to determine that because everybody, while a lot of us can kind of be similar in the ways of how our mental structure is formed as we get older, everybody's different at that point. We can all, I could have somebody the same age as me, and we can be on totally different, mental spectrums when it comes to being able to take certain things and not being able to take others. So, really, defining the idea of when to be taught about this kind of stuff is something that's incredibly difficult to really determine. However, it is important to keep in mind that at some point, that point's gonna come eventually. You never really know when, but it's important to keep in mind that it's gonna happen.
Right. And I agree. And, I'm one of those overprotective parents when it comes to you. There are certain topics that we've had on the docket to talk about on this podcast for some time now that I just haven't felt we were ready to talk about those things. Sex and drugs, but not rock and roll. We're not going to talk about rock and roll. But, there are topics out there that we're getting to that point where we have to talk about them. Because if I don't, then I'm doing you a disservice.
Yeah.
But I'm going through that anxiety already of, oh my God, you're growing up. I have to deal with it. How do I cope with it? I'm not running out and convincing people to pass legislation so that I can deal with my own fears. That's a little extreme.
Yeah, and especially now that I am growing up, I've learned that learning about the world and finding out about all these different things and different people and what they believe in and what really just goes on in the world is part of growing up. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't want to grow up. I don't
You want to be a Toys R Us kid? Oh, wait, can't do that anymore.
Yeah. It's just I have the fears as well of growing up, much like protective parents might have over their kids growing up. And I'm getting to the point where I'm having to think about things like college. I'm starting to have to drive. I'm getting to the age where I'm gonna be able to eventually vote. And I'm gonna be accepting all these responsibilities at a certain time. And a lot of people aren't really ready for that sort of thing. It's technically a set time almost where every responsibility is thrown at
They
you.
just drop it right on your shoulders all at once, yeah.
Basically, they just drop it all on your shoulders and you're just supposed to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot of these parents kind of have to understand, is that at some point, all that load is going to be dropped onto your kids. And most of the time, your kids probably aren't ready for it either. So the best thing to do, like they mentioned, is to communicate with your child. And that's really the best thing you can do, because you're both technically going through a similar experience. You're watching your kid grow up into a world that you're fearful of how they're going to react to it. And your kid is forced to have all this burden on their shoulders as they get to just this certain age where all this grown-up stuff is just implanted into their minds. And that, oh wow, I have to deal with all this right now when I don't even think I'm ready for it.
And that's a very good point. And this is why this podcast works so well, is that perspective. Because as parents, our job is obviously to keep you alive, but also to get you ready for that. And if we don't, then we're failing as parents. So I have to overcome my desire to protect you so that I can get you ready for that, so that you can be, like I said at the top of the show, productive citizens in society.
Yeah.
And everything that's going on here with parental rights is not doing that. It's doing the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take our last break, and we're going to come back and talk about more good news, the ongoing effects of catering to conservative propaganda in our schools.
Yippee.
We're going to bash those conservatives on this one. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Teens. Let's talk a little bit about the ongoing effects of catering to conservative propaganda in our schools. This actually comes from a CNN article. They say that recently an email was sent to the parents of several school districts in Florida making an announcement about AP psychology courses availability to students in the state. The letter reads, quote, "As you may have seen in the news, the Florida Department of Education has determined that under Florida Administrative Code, select content cannot be taught in Florida classrooms. The College Board AP Psychology course contains such content. College Board requires educators to teach the entire curriculum for an AP course college credit consideration. Therefore, AP Psychology is no longer a potential course option for Florida students to receive college credit." Now, these decisions came after the College Board, which administers the Advanced Placement Program, announced that the state had effectively banned AP Psychology because state legislation, commonly referred to as Florida's Don't Say Gay law, doesn't permit instruction related to sexual orientation or gender identity, which the College Board considers essential for completing the course.
Florida officials have countered that AP Psychology hasn't been banned, but rather that the College Board is playing politics by telling school districts they can't offer the course unless it's taught in full. Florida Department of Education Commissioner Mandy Diaz Jr. issued a statement that AP Psychology can still be offered, quote, in its entirety in a manner that is age and developmentally appropriate, But Florida counties are rushing to figure out what this guidance means before students begin the new school year. As Florida continues to serve as a model for other conservative states looking to overhaul their public education systems, it's vital to understand what led to the standoff over AP psychology and what this controversy reveals about the politics of parental rights in the supposedly, quote, free state of Florida. It isn't Florida's first scuffle with the College Board. Earlier this year, the state banned AP African American Studies from its public schools after Republican lawmakers asserted the course taught critical race theory. That decision led the College Board to revise its AP African American Studies curriculum, but the changes didn't appease Florida, nor did it stop several other states from putting the course under review.
In the current fight over AP psychology, the College Board has indicated it doesn't plan to negotiate with Florida. Some Republican lawmakers in Florida have predictably responded by accusing the College Board of being, quote, so committed to wokeism that it's willing to sacrifice the course rather than adjust it to comply with Florida's rules. I think it's hilarious when politicians accuse someone who's not a politician of being political on a topic that they inflame themselves.
Yep.
Again, hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
The AP psychology has even been caught in that AP psychology has even been caught in the crosshairs of the Don't Say Gay law, may surprise many Florida parents. When the controversial legislation, officially titled the Parental Rights, again, let's stick to, false names here. The Parental Rights in Education Act was first proposed in 2022. It only pertained to classroom instruction for students in kindergarten through third grade. How does AP psychology get involved at third grade? Oh, that narrow designation helped inoculate the bill against much of criticism directed at it.
Yet critics recognize that Florida's restrictive legislation wasn't really intended for only its youngest students. Instead, as some educators and LGBTQ activists contended it was the opening wedge of a broader assault on LGBTQ rights in public education in the state. In April, that plan became clearer when Florida State Board of Education expanded its ban on instruction about sexual orientation and gender identity through the 12th grade. The bill sold to Florida voters as a sensible measure to ensure kindergartners wouldn't hear about sex in the classroom would now prevent high school seniors from being able to learn about the psychological basis of human sexuality, and possibly also from earning college credit for such coursework.
So here's another classic example of misdirection and gaslighting. So they got the initial law passed by saying, this is so that children between kindergarten and third grade don't have to learn about sex. Well, what horrible person would want to teach a third grader about sex? So everyone jumped on board and said, oh, you're right. Yeah, we shouldn't be teaching these kids about sex, even though there wasn't a single course or anything in the curriculum that had anything to do with teaching kids about sex at that age.
Yeah, while we aren't in Florida, when I was in kindergarten through third grade, I never learned any of that stuff.
Right.
Not about any sort of sexual orientation, whether it be straight, gay, lesbian. I didn't learn about any of that.
And this was put on the books preventatively so that we didn't distort our children. And if you said no to it, well, then you're a horrible person. You want to expose these young kids to sexual education? What's wrong with you? What kind of monster are you? So it was, again, that dominant philosophy of, you have to go along with this or you're a terrible person.
So you're not allowed to debate with it either.
Right. So that got it passed. Well, shortly after it got passed, they went in and they revised the bill. So now it's not the third grade, now it's the 12th grade. And they did all that behind the scenes, behind closed doors. The public didn't get a chance to vote on that. They didn't even get notice of it. It just happened. because that's what they had planned to do all along from the very beginning. Let's convince people, let's lie to people to get the bill in, and then we can manipulate the bill however we want. That's how these politicians are thinking. People need to keep that in mind. In light of all the talk in Florida and around the country that parents should have a greater say over their children's education, it's worth noting that the AP Psychology class apparently has generated little objections in Florida in the past. Quite the opposite. It was the 5th most popular AP course in the state in 2021. For the 2023 to 24 school year, about 30,000 Florida students plan to take the class who can't now. Now, what kind of effect is that going to have on their future college now that they can't get those credits? Given both AP Psychology's popularity and its uncontroversial reputation in the state, the dust-up over the course exposes the lie of the parental rights discourse in Florida and elsewhere. Some Florida parents have voiced their anger that the course may be canceled, just as they've protested the ban on AP African American Studies. Rather than empowering parents, and this is really the moral lesson of this podcast, rather than empowering parents, Florida's overreaching legislation always seemed to be just a play for power by the state's Republican lawmakers, and especially a publicity stunt by a small-minded governor who wants to be the next president. And that's where it is. He's trying so hard, and failing miserably, by the way, at becoming the next president, that he's doing everything he can to get what he perceives are wins in his column that say he should be president. And really what it's doing is it's showing the rest of the country how screwed up Florida is getting at this point in time. So in a separate aside, just to kind of emphasize the impact here, the state of Florida is losing. It's a huge convention state.
Yep.
People, tourism, conventions, businesses come in all the time. They're losing over $1 billion over the next 7 to 10 years from conventions that are explicitly pulling out. Conventions that have held their conventions or national annual conventions in Florida for decades are pulling out of the state because of these practices.
Yep.
And the state has no income tax. They depend on tourism dollars, which is what conventions are classified as. So if $1 billion is coming out of that coffer, who do you think is going to foot the bill for that? Your taxpayers are going to. Just like he's in the middle of a battle, a very personal battle, DeSantis is, with Disney. And that's costing the state over $1 billion as well. Who's going to pick up that tab? The taxpayers are going to. Also that he can garner some kind of, I don't know what kind of attention, because it's all negative attention he's getting, just so he can be president. It's costing the Florida residents a fortune for him to be president.
Yeah.
This also was the man, by the way, not to cut you off, but this also was the man who had the laws in Florida changed that would have forced him to resign from office when he declared that he was going to run for president. He had those laws changed just so he could still be governor of Florida and run for president. That law was on the books specifically because when you're running for president, you can't dedicate the time to your job as governor that you need to.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the person that law restricts is able to overturn that law for their own benefit, pretty much.
Right. So that's sort of the state that we're at here. This is another situation where people are using the children, parental rights. It's all a smokescreen. It's all politics. Parental rights is the right for parents to make the decisions. And when you're lobbying and you're using third-party groups to get laws put in place that take that right to choose away, that's the exact opposite of parental rights.
Yeah, it's like what DeSantis is doing pretty much. Like, how many parents are actually being okay with this? Some select parents are, obviously, but parents as a whole, you're taking the option away from them. You're literally controlling every aspect of the schooling system to where the parents have literally no say in anything, and it's all just to fit one personal minded view.
Yeah, and every survey that they've taken that has addressed this has shown you're looking at maybe 12% of the population approves of it, or somewhere in that amount. Certainly nowhere close to a majority of people. But, the Republicans right now are doing everything they can to restrict what people can do, what the power of the people have is.
Which, again, despite the fact that they say that we're a quote-unquote free country and that we're for liberty and claiming themselves as a party for liberty, they're restricting anybody's right to do anything outside of what they want.
That's right. That's called hypocrisy.
Yep.
If you can spell it, I'll show you one. So that was all we had today. I think I've poked at enough sticks in people's cages with this one today.
Yeah.
We're going to take a very quick break, come back, and get your closing thoughts.
Yeah, boy. Okay, so to everybody out there, I just wanted to say that the concern for parental rights, to an extent, is a reasonable one. The idea that you don't want your kids to learn certain things at certain ages, yes, it's respectable and it's understandable considering the vast changes that the world has been going through. But I think a lot of parents who are worried about that, and also kids, need to hear that eventually that's gonna happen. And the job of the parent is to be preparing their kids to become adults. And it's a scary thing for everybody. Parents are scared that their kids are gonna grow up and are gonna have to face the world because they're just worried that they're gonna face it in a way that they don't really understand because they don't personally understand the world from when they were originally children and had to face it themselves. And children themselves are terrified about growing up because they're gonna be thrusted with all these responsibilities that they may not feel like they're ready for. And I feel like the whole point is to really not think about it politically, but think about it in the ways of how do you think it'll help to actually benefit your child rather than to push any sort of political agenda. Communicate with your children, communicate with the board. Don't just don't get politics involved with it. Don't get legislators involved with it. If it does have to come to that as like a really extreme example, sure. But in reality, legislation shouldn't have to dictate what schools can and can't do.
Sage words, as always.
Thank you.
It's also worth noting that one of the things that we try to do here is educate, inform, and to a certain extent, entertain. Don't take I'm not asking anybody to take what we say as gospel. Don't take what we say as what you should believe. I want to enable people to go out, do your own research. It takes us a little bit of while to do the research for each of these podcasts. And I would encourage people to go out and source your own information. Fact check us. Go out and think for yourself. All we're really trying to do is to spawn people to action.
Yeah, and that is one of the good things about having all these resources now is that
Absolutely. So think for yourself. Always think for yourself. We're happy to be here as a resource, but we don't want to be the only resource.
Yep.
Anyway, with that in mind, I want to once again thank our listening and viewing audience for getting us to that 50,000 download mark. But I would also invite everyone who's listening at this point to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens Both audio and visual of video of all of our podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things, and we're available anywhere you get a podcast: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. I would also invite you to write in, give us your feedback. Tell us how far off my rocker I really am. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things. On Facebook, we're at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. We're on Instagram at instagram.com/insightsintothings. Or you can get links to all that and more on our official website at insightsintothings.com.
And don't forget to check out our other two podcasts, Insights and Entertainment, hosted by you and Mommy, and Insights into Tomorrow, our not really monthly podcast anymore, hosted by you and my brother Sam.
Fair enough. That's it. Another one in the books.
Bye, everyone.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Your hosts are Joseph and Madison Whalen, a father and daughter team making their way through the challenges of the teenage years.
Welcome to Insights into Teens. This is episode 180, Perspectives on Parenting, Top Challenges of Parenting. That's not at all
Not it, actually. It's Perspectives on Parenting, Getting Them Ready.
Okay, whatever.
Hopefully you got the same script as me.
I have the questions, all right? This is just from a couple of however long ago it was.
All right, well, it'll be interesting if nothing else.
Anyway, I'm your host, Madison Whalen, giving a great intro so far, and my co-host today, Joseph Whalen.
Hi.
This is why I don't do this stuff anymore.
A little out of practice. You only do this every 10 episodes.
And also our special guest for today, Michelle Whalen from Insights and Entertainment.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, everyone.
How are you doing?
Sound like, special guest. It's Mom. We just had dinner. It wasn't like, I haven't seen you in a while or anything.
That's true.
Been a while since we've been on the air, though.
Well, yes, that is true.
All right, so how's everybody doing?
Fantastic.
Wonderful. And you?
Good. Not used to this, but we're working on it.
And another year older.
Yeah,
look at that.
Ain't that nifty, am I right?
Pretty soon we're not going to be able to do Insights into Teens anymore.
I still got a couple of years, technically.
Well, that's good. So the show will continue for a little while.
Till I'm 20, technically. I'm still a teenager at 19, technically. So
That's true.
True.
And then we'll have to go out and dig up another teenager that can be on the show. Or we'll be lying. Well, technically, you started the show at 12, so.
Right.
Yeah, technically we were lying from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's all a lie.
Bunch of liars.
Anyway, so today we're going to be doing another one of our perspectives on parenting. This is the third episode of this we've done. It's kind of our big episode, 10 episode margin topper off, or segue into the next era of what our Insights into Teens podcasts are going to be about.
Kind of like a season arc, you know?
Pretty much, yeah. And like you said earlier, today we're going to be talking about a section from that we've been pulling from so far for the other episodes, which is getting them ready. So we're going to be going through various different questions relating to things of teaching kids to socialize, instilling good behavior in them, and looking after their educational needs. Since I do not have the right thing up, I do not have a good summary, so that is my best interpretation of what we've got so far.
That's good enough.
All right. But before we get started on the podcast, I'd like to invite the listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions listed under Insights into Teens. You can also find video and audio versions listed under Insights into Things. I'd also like to invite you to give us your feedback on what we're talking about or give us your suggestions for show topics. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com, and links to all these and more are on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
We are ready.
Alrighty. So
Sorry, wrong button.
Oh, we're just full of
I
mistakes.
was almost ready.
We're just full of mistakes today, aren't we?
We're a little out of practice.
A little out of practice. It's been a while. But starting us off, I'm going to be asking both of you questions about teaching kids how to socialize. So I'm going to ask this to you, Father.
Okay.
So, is it the job of a parent to teach their kids how to socialize?
I don't know if it's the job of the parent. I think kids, for the most part, will socialize where they're comfortable. I think parents have the responsibility of kind of setting the example and teaching kids probably the cautious way to socialize, you know, the dangers of it, how to do it right, and encouraging. I think that's probably a better term, is it's a parent's job to encourage you to socialize, but within your comfort zone, I think.
All right, that's fair. Mommy, you want to add anything on that?
No, I would probably agree for the most part with that. I think, nowadays you have a lot of kids that do homeschooling, so there's not as much socializing for some people, but a lot of the homeschoolers actually have their own school system in some respects so that they can have the kids socialize. So back in the day, whenever you heard that somebody, was homeschooled, it kind of meant that they didn't know how to act in public or didn't know how to act with other people because they were never around other people, where now homeschooled kids actually probably get more interaction because not only are they're in a different type of environment, so they are being able to socialize more. So I think it is important to, for the parents to make sure that their child is in some sort of environment to be able to socialize.
All right, fair enough. I'll lead the next question to you, Mommy. Do or do you not feel kids knowing how to socialize is important, and why or why not?
Oh, absolutely. It's very important because it's how you function, day to day in the world. Fortunately, nowadays, so much can kind of be done in isolation. Unfortunately, we found that out during the pandemic, that people didn't need to necessarily go to work. Now having all of the technology that you have where you could video call with somebody, FaceTime or Zoom or whatever, you don't need to necessarily physically socialize, but you still have some sort of skill set that you need to be able to communicate and socialize even virtually. So I think it's just important in general to be able to, not have anxiety when you want to go get something to eat and you need to go order from a restaurant or pick something up at the store. There's all that social interaction, but there are times, again, because of the pandemic and everything, there's so much that became virtual or curbside where you don't have to, where there are people that have the anxiety of having the social interaction where it kind of helped them to still be kind of part of things without having it. But I think it's a skill set that everybody, should have.
Okay, do not at all feel called out by that. Anyway, I'll turn the next question over to you, Father. Can kids gain enough social skills on their own through things like school and interacting with others with little parental influence?
If I'm going back to when I was a kid, I would say absolutely. My parents had very little influence on my social upbringing, I'd say. We, did it all of ourselves. My parents weren't the helicopter parents. They weren't hovering over me. They weren't part of the PTA. They weren't the soccer moms. None of that stuff existed at the time. So as a kid, we did everything ourselves from a social standpoint. We got home from school. If you had homework, you finished your homework, and then you were out playing until it was dark and you had to come in at that point in time. You did it through school because you made friends with everyone at school. And there was a very different environment at the time. Unfortunately, nowadays, there are too many things out there now that are a danger to kids. So parents tend to be overly protective these days. And as a result, you get the creation of play dates. We didn't have play dates as a kid. If I wanted to hang out with my friends, I'd get on the phone, call and see if they were there. I'd go over to their house. In the neighborhood that I lived in, it was a not a gated community, but it was a closed community in that it wasn't on any major roads. So the whole community itself was about 1 square mile. So if I wanted to hang out with my friends, I'd either go to my best friend who was on the next street over, or I'd walk across town for 5 minutes to go to see the kids that were over there. So there was nothing that kept you in the house. We didn't have technology. We weren't glued to our phones or anything like that. So you had to go out and play with people and make friends because there was no substitute. You had 3 channels on showing my age here, but you had 3 channels on TV unless you were rich enough to have cable, and then you had like 15 channels. So there wasn't anything at home to do. You didn't have video games. You didn't have computers when I was a kid. You had toys and you played with your friends with toys, or you'd go out and play sports or something like that. So my parents had almost nothing to do with my socializing. So in fact, if it was up to my mom, I probably wouldn't have had any friends because she didn't let anybody over the house. She hated having people over the house because she didn't want people making a mess at the house. So today it's very different though. And I think today there are so many things at home that keep kids from being social. Ironically, social media is one of them. People think social media is a social activity, and it's not. It's the exact opposite. So as a result, parents today are organizing kids in, play groups or whatever to try and get them to socialize more, because we have to get you ready to interact with society as an adult. And then if you're not going to do it yourself, then the parents have to at least put some effort into that.
That's fair enough. The next question goes to you, Mommy. What methods do you feel are best in getting kids to socialize?
Well, I think it helps if there's some sort of common interest. So, for kids to either join a sport or do dance or some sort of club, some sort of activity, I think that always helps because then you have that common bond versus, hey, I'm into video games and I'm into baseball, but I don't like video games and I don't like baseball. You might have a conflict, and then it might make you actually not even want to socialize. So I think that's probably a good start. Besides school, I think going to school or being, with kids your own age is a great way to kind of start the socializing. And then if you see that there's some sort of, issue where, maybe they're not socializing enough, maybe they're not getting along with people, maybe trying to find a group where, they would kind of feel that they belong.
That makes sense. Do you want to weigh in on this, Daddy?
No, I think Mommy covered that topic pretty well.
Alrighty. Next question goes to you then. Should certain social activities be limited to different age groups? If so, which ones?
None come to mind immediately, but I'm sure there are certain ones that are age appropriate. Certain things require certain resources. If you want to go to the mall's only going to allow a certain age group to be there unsupervised. If you want to go to the movies, you need transportation, you need money. So there's logistics around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you just want to hang out with your friends, no, that shouldn't be any age group. You're going to watch TV or play video games or play board games. So anything that's there probably would be age specific to the actual activity itself, and it would be less dependent on the socializing aspect of it than it would be what the actual activity, I think, would be.
That makes sense. Anything to say on that?
No, I think that was okay.
All right. Mommy, the next question is for you.
Okay.
What kind of impact do you feel that you've had on my social life?
I don't know. I hope a positive one. While you weren't in any sort of clubs or anything up until high school, you did do the before and after care, which that was kind of, not that it was necessarily a club, it was something that was needed because of, going and working, in the office and the hours of school and things like that. But that kind of became a way for you to socialize with a vast array of kids that weren't necessarily all within your age group. When you started, you were one of the younger kids, and then you became, the older kids. So you got to kind of see the transition of being the kid that, I don't have that much homework, I want to go play, to being the older kid that had more homework, and you got annoyed at the younger kids who just wanted to play because you still had homework that you needed to do. But I think you also kind of found your niche of, okay, I kind of like being the older kid and hanging with the younger kids and kind of being the mom of the group in a way. I think that kind of became your niche in a lot of cases, because even with, the kids in the neighborhood, you're one of the older ones when you would get together and do stuff, and you kind of organize, and you're kind of like the kid wrangler. Come on, let's do this. Let's go here. Let's do that. Or, even when you were in marching band, if somebody needed a Band-Aid, wait, I got one. Oh, you need a fan? You're hot. Yeah, here's that. Oh, you were the one that, was taking care of everybody. So I think that kind of helped to put you in that. I know I kind of look back and I kind of have regrets that we didn't get you more involved with things when you were younger. And unfortunately, it was time constraints where, there were activities that started at, 4:00 in the afternoon, but because of our working schedules, we couldn't do that. So you weren't able to do dance or brownies or Girl Scouts or things like that.
I like brownies.
Who doesn't? So I kind of regret that, and I wonder how things would have changed if you had been able to do those things. Would you be, different socially than you are now?
That's fair.
But, I don't think you have any regrets for it. I don't think you ever go, I really wish.
Yeah, not really, no.
You're kind of, happy, like, being where you are. And again, I think part of it is also because we went through COVID, and that was when you were in middle school. So that was another like informative year time frame that kind of got compressed, where that should have been more getting out, hanging out with friends, doing things, but nobody was doing any of that. But you have this nice little core group, of friends, which is important, I think, that everybody have that. So you might not always be able to get together with everybody, but it's like, all right, well, do you want to do something? All right, we'll do something this week, and it's maybe not everybody all at once, but okay, so this day you hang out with this person and this day you get to hang out with that one. And, so I feel, that it kind of, all right, we did a good job. She's not the person that's, sitting at home, not talking to anybody, not communicating with anybody, not hanging out with anybody. So, so I think we did good so far.
Fair enough.
Just need to learn how to, order food on your own. That's all.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about that. All right. So the next question is going to go out to you. So you mentioned before how a parent can kind of influence a kid in the terms of them being social. So do you believe that a parent could cause a child to be less social?
Yes. There are certainly a number of different ways that a parent can have that impact on a child. And sometimes it's not a negative impact. Sometimes if you're someone who is more interested in going out and socializing than you are in doing the things that you need to be responsible about doing, schoolwork or chores or whatever, having a parent make you less social is a positive. The negatives tend to come in with parents who live vicariously through their kids. And you see this a lot with sports. You have parents who want to relive their youth through their kids. And so they get them in every sports event. They're doing traveling teams. They're doing tournaments, and their entire life is consumed with going out and doing these sports, not because the kid really wants to do it, but because the parent wants to do it. And that's where it gets dangerous, and that's where you kind of have to be careful.
Yeah, you also mentioned the idea of helicopter parents. And do you think a helicopter parent could also cause a child to be less social in a more negative light?
I think a helicopter parent who's overly cautious, and unfortunately in today's society, it's not unjustified to be overly cautious of your children, but a helicopter parent could really put too much fear in their kids and transfer their own fear to their kids and have them make them be less social as a result. So yes, there's definitely that negative effect.
So really, like, depending on what type of parent you can be, either you live vicariously through your kids, you're a helicopter parent, or there's some other combination of it. A parent can always cause a child to be less social in a positive light, but also in a more negative light.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different examples of bad parents out there that can cause this type of problem to happen. You have parents that aren't involved at all with their kids. And as a result, their kids are overly social. They wind up getting into groups that are a bad influence on them. They wind up getting into substance abuse issues. And parents should be doing something about their kids, but they're not. And they allow their kids to basically run free with no constraints on them at all. And that's not a good thing either.
All right. Final question in this section goes to you, Mommy. Are there right and wrong ways of teaching a kid how to be social, and what would you say they are?
Well, yeah, there's, I think you need to, have your child interact, out in the real world, and not keep them, at home all the time. And, children should be, seen and not heard, because you see it time and time again where, a parent has their child out, shopping or at a restaurant or what's so funny?
Nothing.
Okay. And they are totally misbehaving because they don't know how to act because, the parent never took the child out in public. So the child has no idea how to act socially, like what's the right way, to act, where, Daddy and I, when you were a baby, you went out, you did things. If you cried, we took care of it. Or, there was really only one time ever that we actually left someplace because we couldn't get you to stop crying. It was just you were upset about something. You either didn't feel well or whatever. And unfortunately, you were a baby, so you couldn't tell us what was wrong. We did all the things. We changed you. We fed you. We burped you. We did this, all the...
We beat you.
No, we didn't do that.
We put the pillow over your head.
No, we didn't do that either. But, we went through all the things and it just got to the point. So we didn't want to be that parent where we were ruining everybody else's time. But then there were multiple times where we would go places and people would